Hey guys, how are all of you beautiful people? Hope all of you are doing fine. And yes, this is the next part of Ben with Gwen. A story about how Ben and Gwen's relationship evolves over the next 4 years following their summer trip. So let's start without any delay. Let's start this great series. September, Year 3. Ben collapsed, dropping his head onto the table. Gwen smiled sympathetically. Yeah, I know. She turned her head around to glance at her grandfather for a moment. He was too busy driving to be listening to them. She leaned in and spoke a little quieter anyway. But it won't be so bad this year, right? Ben perked up. He was about to reaffirm his hatred for school and how he dreaded the end of summer, but Gwen's words got a better message through to him. I guess not. Exactly, Gwen agreed. We'll stick together this time. No more boring school years. Sorry, but nothing you can do will make school less boring. You know what I mean, doofus. Ben nodded. He understood perfectly well. No repeats of our first year back from the trip. No avoiding each other. None of that crap. He smiled to himself. They wouldn't be together all day every day anymore, but in all likelihood, they'd be seeing each other again after school just about every day. For this reason, when they pulled up in front of Gwen's house just a few minutes later, Ben and Gwen were in much better moods than they had been the previous couple of years. Gwen's father must have been waiting by the window for them, because he stepped out the front door as soon as they arrived. Ben and Max helped Gwen carry her stuff out of the rust bucket as they went to meet him on the front lawn. Gwen. Welcome home, Frank said, kneeling down and holding out his arms. Gwen smiled. Hi, Daddy, she said as she gave him a hug. Daddy. Gwen turned around and saw Ben smirking. Her face went red when she realized what she'd called her father in front of people, but she rolled her eyes and tried to play it off like she didn't care what Ben thought. Ben shivered suddenly. Before he even saw her, he felt the icy, disapproving gaze of Gwen's mother as she came out of the house to join them. Gwen didn't seem intimidated, however. She went up to her mother and gave her a hug, greeting her as warmly as she'd greeted her father. Hi, Mom. Welcome home. Natalie placed her hands on her daughter's shoulders. When her gaze shifted over to Ben, he quickly pretended to be looking at something else. How was the trip, Dad? Frank asked Max as they shook hands. It went off without a hitch, he declared. And the kids seemed to have a great time. I hear Joel has returned home, Natalie commented. Ben got the feeling she was upset with Joel for not giving them many updates on his whereabouts. I wonder how Lucy lasted so long living with someone who hates fun as much as her. Yep. He and Camille got home just recently, Max replied. Lucy couldn't have been happier. That's good news, Frank said. I hope she knows she's always welcome to stay with us again. Max nodded. Well, I should be getting Ben back home to his parents next. All right. Good seeing you again, Dad. And Ben, we hope we'll be seeing you around again this year, Frank said. Ben was a little taken aback by his uncle's casual reference to how often he'd come over to hang out with Gwen last year. Sure. He shivered again, turning and making eye contact with his aunt. It was really hard to tell if Natalie was glaring at him or if that was just how she always looked. I'm glad you and Gwen enjoyed your trip again this year, she said. Ben had no idea if she was being sincere or not. He decided to just nod. Meanwhile, Gwen was hugging and exchanging parting words with her grandfather. Once she finished, Ben realized it was their turn to say goodbye to each other. Usually, whenever they were in front of their parents, they would call each other doofus and dweeb and basically try not to come off as too friendly. Even after being friends for so long, they still hadn't quite gotten over the embarrassment of getting along in front of their parents. So, Ben was prepared for one of Gwen's clever jabs about being glad to be rid of him for the school year or something. However, instead of anything like that, she gave him a warm smile, a wave, and a very genuine bye. Ben had a comeback prepared already for an insult, but he wasn't prepared for a simple goodbye. And something about her smile really threw him off. "Ah, yeah. Bye," Ben managed, returning the wave and giving her a gentle smile. Immediately afterwards, he put on a straight face and turned away, hoping Gwen's parents wouldn't say anything about their friendly interaction. After climbing back into the rust bucket, Ben sat up front in the passenger's seat. He looked out the window and thought of nothing in particular. But before long, an image flashed through his mind. In his head, he saw Gwen, smiling at him just as she'd done a few minutes ago on her front lawn. Ben shook his head. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but something about the way she'd looked at him was just plain odd. He didn't know why, but the image of her smile was burned into his memory, and it kept popping into his mind as they drove to his house. It gave him a weird feeling in his chest. "Something wrong, Sport?" Max asked, seeing the look of consternation on Ben's face. Ben snapped out of it. Just not looking forward to going back to school is all he said, knowing that would sound reasonable enough. He did his best to put the image of Gwen's smile out of his mind, but somehow, he knew it wouldn't be easy. Man, that's weird. The next day was Ben's first day of 7th grade. He was still in middle school, but he had a new homeroom class. When he arrived, he found his assigned seat and sat down. Unlike the other kids who milled around talking to their friends, Ben just sat there and fiddled with the Omnitrix. For the first time, Ben wished he and Gwen went to the same school. Even though he wasn't the only one sitting alone, it sure felt like it. He was flipping through his newest aliens from that summer when the sound of laughter made him look up. His first instinct was someone was probably laughing at him or at someone else. He'd dealt with bullies enough to be used to that. But thankfully, that wasn't the case. A girl had just walked in who was now talking with two of her friends, and they were simply happy to see each other. Ben was about to look back down at the Omnitrix, but something made him stop. He didn't know the girl who'd just entered the room, but he'd seen her around school often enough over the years. He'd been going to school with most of the kids in his grade since elementary school, so even if he'd never had a class with any of them, he at least knew their names. He was pretty sure this girl's name was Julie. He'd never been in a class with her before, so he'd never really interacted with her, or even taken much notice of her. But for some reason, he couldn't look away now. Her short hair, the smile on her face as she spoke with her friends, something about her just drew his attention. Before long, Ben realized he was staring. Not wanting to look like a creep, he tore his gaze away from her and looked back down at his watch. But just like yesterday with Gwen, the image of Julie's smile was burned into his mind. He flipped through his aliens again, but he kept thinking about her. What the hell's going on with me? After school, Ben went to meet Gwen at the park. They hadn't made any specific plans the day before, but they'd decided to meet there since it had become routine for them the previous year. Ben arrived first, so he had to wait around a bit. As he waited, he thought about his day at school. He hadn't been able to focus very well all day, not that that was anything new for him. Every class was the same. He would walk in and tell himself he'd actually pay attention this time. Then his new teacher would do their introduction, and about a minute in, Ben would space out. Usually, his mind would drift back to last summer, and especially to Gwen. The only thing in school that managed to capture his interest that day seemed to be Julie, and he wasn't exactly happy about that. Luckily, he only had a few classes with her besides homeroom. In the classes he had with her, he tried to avoid looking at her, but that somehow only made it more difficult. Ben was so preoccupied with thinking about his day, he didn't even notice when Gwen walked up to him. Earth to Ben," Gwen said, snapping Ben out of his daze. "Oh," Ben said, flinching a little. Sorry." He stood up. "Hey, Gwen. What's up with you?" Gwen asked. "You looked mentally off-world." "It's nothing," Ben said. "Just thinking about my new classes and stuff." Gwen smiled, suddenly a little excited. "Are your new classes as awesome as mine?" she asked. "'Cause all my new teachers seem really smart. One of them used to be a college professor. I can already tell I'm going to love his class." "Wow, she really is a nerd." "Heh, lucky you," Ben said. "All my teachers this year are super boring, as usual." "Just because you have the attention span of a megawatt doesn't mean they are boring," Gwen said with a smirk. "So, what do you want to do today?" "I don't have much homework yet, so I've got a few hours free." "You wanna go to my house? Watch some TV or something?" Ben suggested. "Sure," Gwen said. She flashed that smile again, then turned and started walking. It took Ben a second to get his bearings. Seeing that smile again caught him off guard and sent images of her and Julie flashing through his mind. "You coming?" Gwen asked, having looked back to see Ben standing still. Ben shook his head and followed after her. "Seriously, what's up?" "You're really spacey today," Gwen said as they walked together. "What?" It's nothing." "Really?" Ben claimed. Gwen gave him a skeptical look, but she didn't press him any further. Ben lied awake for a long time that night. Maybe I should have talked to her about it. Hanging out with Gwen that day managed to take Ben's mind off of it a little, but for much of that time, he was distracted. Gwen could tell, but after he said it was nothing, she tried to act like she didn't notice from then on. He knew she could tell, though. He was doing a really poor job of hiding it. But talking to Gwen about it would mean admitting to her that he was thinking about a girl. He didn't know if that was something he could do, for several reasons. Earlier, he'd been trying to place the familiar feelings he'd been having about Julie. He knew he'd felt it before at some point, but it didn't come to him at first. His memory had only been jogged when he was playing a video game with Gwen, and she said something like, "I just totally crushed you." The thing about a crush is, sometimes you get crushed. That's what this weird obsession with Julie was, a crush, simple as that. It's the same way he'd felt about Kai. Just one look at her was all it took. However, things with Kai hadn't exactly turned out very well. Gwen had helped him then, though. Maybe talking to her could help him again now. No. But that was out of the question. It would have been a much easier option if this was only about Julie, but in the back of his mind, there was something else holding him back too. The memories of both Gwen's and Julie's smiling faces flashed in Ben's mind again. "Go!" he moaned in frustration, rolling over in his bed and slamming his fists into the mattress. "Puberty sucks." He took a deep breath. Okay. Forget the Gwen thing, that's probably unrelated. Let's figure out this Julie thing. You know what, forget the whole thing. Tomorrow, I'm not even gonna look at Julie. That was Ben's decision. His crush on Kai had been more trouble than it was worth, and he'd gotten over her, so he figured the best thing to do would be to get over Julie as soon as possible. It'll be easy. It wasn't easy. I'm not gonna look at her. Ben was telling himself that the entire walk to his home room, but as soon as he got there, he immediately looked at her desk. There she was. Okay, that was an accident. Not my fault. She was just in my line of sight. He walked over to his desk and sat down. He stared at his desk and tried to stop thinking about all of this, but that naturally proved to be counterproductive as it only made him think about it more. Ben switched to looking around at everyone else in the room. There were lots of other girls in his class. Most of them had been in his class before at some time or another over the years, unlike Julie. In fact, out of everyone in this class, he probably knew Julie the least. He didn't know her at all. But then again, he didn't know Kai at all either. Despite his best efforts, Ben looked at Julie again. She's pretty. Ben couldn't stop the words from passing through his mind. He felt kind of lame for thinking that way. Liking a girl just for her looks seemed like a very JT and cash thing to do. But then again, they'd probably go for girls like that. Ben turned and looked to the other side of the room where a group of cheerleaders were sitting and talking. Then he tore his eyes away from them, feeling guilty for thinking that way. Don't be that guy. He looked back at Julie. He wanted to figure out why he liked her, so that he could convince himself to stop liking her. Well, I guess I kinda like that short hair. As soon as he said that, an image of Gwen, with her distinctive short red hair, popped into his mind. Off. Ben moaned. He lightly smacked himself in the forehead. Thoughts like that were the last thing he wanted right now. He sighed. This is gonna suck. Ben's crush on Julie only got worse as the week progressed. He found himself simultaneously looking forward to and dreading the classes he shared with her, as he knew he wouldn't be able to keep himself from looking over at her every 5 seconds. Even hearing her voice from across the room was enough to give him butterflies, and that's not a feeling he liked. Worse than that, she was constantly on his mind, even when he was in a class she wasn't in. He wondered what she liked and disliked. He even thought about whether or not she would ever like him back. This would go on all day, and it didn't stop until after school. Like usual, Ben met up with Gwen as soon as they were both free after school that Friday. And since it was the start of the weekend and neither of them had anything else to do, they spent all afternoon together. After meeting in the park, they went to Gwen's house. They spent most of the time playing video games, and Gwen even showed off a new spell she'd been practicing. Ben stayed so long, he was there when Gwen's parents got home. Even though they were kind of embarrassed by that, Ben ended up staying for dinner. Finally, Gwen's father drove Ben home, and Gwen rode along with him even though she didn't have to. Ben waved goodbye to them as they drove off. He stepped inside his house, and for no reason at all, he thought of Julie. He groaned as he shut the front door, hating the sudden intrusive thought. But that's when he realized something. That was the first time he'd thought of Julie since the school day ended. Ben thought back to earlier in the day. He remembered thinking about her smile again as he walked to the park to meet Gwen after school. But after that, absolutely nothing until now. He ran up to his room to think about this. It's Gwen. That's what he realized. He'd stopped thinking about Julie the second he saw Gwen, and he thought of Julie again the second Gwen was gone. Except for maybe that first day, he could hardly remember any times when he'd thought about Julie while he was with Gwen. Something about hanging out with his cousin took his mind off his crush. This is great. Ben smiled and fist pumped. This was exactly the trick he was looking for. It was the weekend now, which meant he wouldn't have to see Julie for 2 whole days, and he could spend practically all of that time with Gwen if he wanted to. Right away, he grabbed his phone and called Gwen. After a few rings, Gwen's voice came through. "Hey," she said. "You forget something." Ben was confused, then he realized she was still in her dad's car on the way back to her house. "Oh. No." Ben hesitated for a second. He realized he hadn't thought of what to say to Gwen. He couldn't just say spend the whole weekend with me so I can take my mind off my latest crush. He lightly slapped himself on the forehead for once again acting without thinking. "I just wanted to ask if you wanted to hang out again tomorrow." He decided that was safe and true enough. "Yeah, sure," Gwen responded. Even though they basically hung out every day whether they made plans or not, Gwen still seemed happy to hear Ben offer. "What did you have in mind? Wanna go to the arcade again?" Ben suggested. "Sure." "Hold on 1 second," Gwen said. In a lower voice, Ben could hear her talking to her father. "It's just Ben. He's asking if I can hang out again tomorrow." "Thanks, Daddy." Then she came in clearly again. "Yeah, the arcade sounds good." "Okay, cool. See you tomorrow, dweeb." "See ya, doofus." The next day, Ben and Gwen met up before noon and went to the arcade as planned. For the next few hours, they challenged each other over and over again to different games, always trying to be the best. It was a lot of fun, and it reminded them of when they'd went there the previous year. When they got hungry, they got some pizza and sat down to eat. A question had been on Ben's mind since last night, so he decided now would be a good time to ask it. "Did you tell your dad about us?" Gwen, who was in the middle of chewing a bite of pizza, started coughing. She took a few gulps of her soda to sort herself out. "What are you talking about?" she asked Ben once she'd finished drinking. She looked kind of flustered, but Ben figured it was from the coughing. "I just mean, yesterday, you told your dad when I asked if you could hang out today. And I guess he was cool with it." "Does he know we're friends now?" Ben asked. "Oh," Gwen said. Well, I haven't told him exactly, but I'm pretty sure he can tell. I usually tell my parents what I'm doing when I go out, and when I do, I'm usually going to hang out with you, so." Plus, they didn't seem that surprised when you were there when they got home yesterday. Ben nodded. He'd been more or less keeping his friendship with Gwen a secret from his parents still. He usually didn't tell them when he was going out, and whenever they asked him what he'd been up to, he'd tell them he was alone or with other friends from school. But, since Gwen's parents probably knew, that must mean his parents knew too. Their fathers talked all the time, and something like this would be perfect gossip for them. Ben was a little embarrassed by that thought, but it was also kind of a relief. Maybe now they could start hanging out more openly around their parents, and he could stop lying about it. "So, you got any other plans today?" Ben asked. Gwen perked up at that and smiled. She shook her head. "What do you want to do next?" she asked. Ben figured she was eager to continue trying to beat him at everything, but he suggested they go someplace else next. He wanted to spend as much time with her as he could. He'd only thought about Julie a few times, and that was only in realization of just how little he was thinking about her. He wanted to keep that up as long as possible. This is working. Ben was in a good mood when he got home that night. Hanging out with Gwen had been great, and more than anything, it was relaxing. He had barely thought of Julie all day. He realized he'd forgotten to make plans with Gwen for tomorrow. That was no big deal, since they'd usually end up texting each other or meeting at the park anyway. But Ben wanted to make sure he could spend all day with her tomorrow, the same way he had today. He took out his phone, then stopped himself. What if I'm annoying her? They spent a lot of time together normally, but they'd hung out all last night and all day today. He figured she might want some time to herself to do other things with the rest of her weekend. For a minute, he stared at his phone a bit more intensely than was necessary. If she doesn't want to, she'll say no. He decided to call her anyway. "Hey, doofus." She responded after only a few rings, and she didn't seem annoyed. "Hey. You wanna go to the mall tomorrow?" Ben asked. They hadn't been there in a while, and he knew she loved the mall. "Sure," Gwen said, sounding excited. "Why, what do you need from there?" Crap." Gwen knew he didn't actually like going to the mall, so she must be assuming he had a specific reason. "Just some stuff," he said vaguely. "Okay. Meet you there at the usual time." "You got it." "Okay. Night, Ben." "Night." Ben hung up. He lied down on his bed and smiled. "If I keep this up, I'll be over Julie in no time." On Sunday, Ben and Gwen hung out just as much as they had on Saturday. They spent all day together, and just as Ben had predicted, he managed to keep his mind off of Julie almost entirely. When Monday came around, Ben walked into school thinking he was over his latest crush. He'd found a way to beat it, and he was quite proud of himself. Then Julie walked in. Ben's heart leapt in his chest. At the sight of her, all the same thoughts he'd had last week came rushing back. It was as if his Julie-free weekend hadn't accomplished a thing. A look of despair washed over Ben's face as he lowered his head face down onto his desk. "This is gonna be harder than I thought." October, Year 3. Over the last month, Ben's goal continued to be getting over his crush on Julie. In some ways, he actually did make some progress towards that end. He became noticeably less obsessive after the first week of school. Once the situation stopped feeling new and scary to him, he just sort of accepted it as an annoying part of his life for the time being. This turned out to be a very helpful attitude, and it allowed him to take his mind off of the situation now and then. For the last couple weeks, he'd managed to have plenty of thoughts that weren't about girls, which he considered an improvement over that first week of school. Additionally, he'd been hanging out with Gwen even more this year than last year. In order to get his mind off of Julie as often as possible, he became much more reliant on Gwen, often spending entire evenings and weekends with her. For a while, Ben was worried he'd be bothering her by asking to hang out so much, but if anything, she seemed to be enjoying all the extra time they'd been spending together. Ben hadn't seen her this happy in a long time. However, despite the progress Ben had made towards getting over his crush, it wasn't happening fast enough for his liking. He figured it would take him all year to get over Julie at this rate, and Ben was not a patient kid. So, he made a decision. He was going to talk to her. It wasn't a decision he thought over very well. The idea came to him one night when he was frustrated about how long this stupid thing had been going on. To the 12-year-old boy, a month seemed like a long time for a crush to last. After all, his crush on Kai had only lasted like a day or two. And that's what gave him the idea. He'd only liked Kai at first because she was pretty as well, but he realized he didn't actually like her very much once he'd gotten to know her a bit. Ben figured the basic concept would be the same here. He didn't really know Julie at all, so maybe if he got to know her, he'd change his mind. The next day, he went to school telling himself he was going to talk to her. He did not. Ben didn't know what came over him. He arrived in homeroom first and sat at his desk waiting for her to show up. When she did, Ben wanted to simply get up, walk over to her, and start talking. But he couldn't. He looked at her and thought about it, but he couldn't even bring himself to stand up. So the next day, he tried again. "You can do this." He was disappointed in himself for chickening out yesterday, so he decided he wouldn't let himself do that again. He sat at his desk waiting for her to show up like he'd done yesterday. And when she did, he kept sitting there. He stared at her and tapped his foot rapidly, but he didn't move from his seat. "Just do it. Just walk over there and say something. Anything." He thought motivational thoughts until it was time to go to his first class. Along with everyone else, he got up and left the room, without a word to Julie. In the hall, he smacked himself in the head. "I can take on giant alien monsters, but I can't talk to a pretty girl." Ben couldn't figure out what his problem was. Julie wasn't intimidating. In fact, she seemed rather nice. She was just a girl. Why can't I just talk to girls like I can talk to Gwen? Ben shook that last thought out of his head. He groaned as he arrived at his first class of the day. On the other side of the hall, he saw Julie entering a different classroom. He told himself he'd talk to her tomorrow. 1 week later, Ben still hadn't talked to her. Every day, he told himself that today would be the day, but it never was. He always had some excuse. He got there too late and there wasn't enough time. She was talking with her friends and he didn't want to interrupt. She looked tired and he didn't want to bother her. But deep down, he knew the problem was him. He was just too afraid to talk to her. One night, he considered getting some advice from someone. That certainly wasn't his style, but the situation was driving him nuts. However, there was a problem with that idea. He didn't really have anyone to ask for girl advice. He definitely wasn't going to ask his parents. That would be way too embarrassing. Same goes for his grandfather, or any other adult for that matter. He couldn't ask another guy either, since he didn't really know any guys at school well enough to ask them about something like this. And that brought him to the subject of Gwen. No. No, no, no. Absolutely not. No. The way he saw it, he'd be throwing out all sense of pride if he went crawling to her asking for advice on how to talk to girls. Plus, he knew he was being a coward, and he wasn't looking forward to hearing her point that out. Ben sighed. She'd helped him with something like this in the past, he admitted. When he had a crush on Kai, and she turned out to be kind of a jerk, Gwen was the one who'd comforted him. The thing about a crush is, sometimes you get crushed. Don't worry. There's lots of other girls out there. The memory of Gwen's words came to mind yet again. Getting crushed was what he was worried about. It's why he couldn't bring himself to talk to Julie. Sure, there's lots of other girls out there. But how do I know which ones are any different than Kai? Ben tried to think of what else Gwen had told him. 2 secret words is all you need to know. That's all she'd told him when he asked her how he could get girls to like him for him, and not for his aliens. But she'd never told him what those words were. Be funny. Be handsome. Have cool stuff. No, that's 3 words. Ben groaned in frustration. Typical Gwen. Just has to act like she knows everything, huh? Ben spent another hour racking his brain, trying to figure this out. In the end, he decided Gwen had just been messing with him. There were no secret words, and he definitely wasn't asking her for advice either way. The next week, Ben was walking down the hall in between classes. He needed to get something out of his locker for his next class. But when he got to his locker, he opened it, and everything spilled out. Oh, Ben sighed. His locker was always a mess, so something like this happening was bound to happen. Whenever it did, Ben told himself he'd keep his locker cleaner from then on, but it never stuck. He knelt down and started picking his stuff up. Need some help? A voice from behind him said. Ben turned around and looked up. It was Julie. He froze. She was talking to him. It was exactly what he'd been trying to do, but it had been sprung on him so suddenly that he was at a loss for words. Ben managed. Julie looked a little confused, but without Ben answering her, she took that as a yes. She knelt down with him and started scooping up Ben's spilled papers and books. Ben stared at her in surprise for a bit longer, then returned to picking up his stuff up as well. What do I do? Ben struggled to say something, but he just continued shoveling his stuff back into his locker in silence. You're Ben, right? Julie asked. Yeah, Ben said, after a moment's hesitation. Ben Tennyson. Grabbing the last few things off the ground, Ben stood up and closed his locker. I'm Julie. Julie Yamamoto. Julie introduced herself, holding out her hand. Ben was surprised with how formal she seemed all of a sudden. Shaking hands seemed like a little much, but he shook her hand anyway, still struggling to process what was happening. We're in the same homeroom. And we're in a few classes together, I think, Julie pointed out, pulling back from the handshake and slipping her hands into the front pockets of her pink hoodie. Yeah, Ben said. He looked at his locker and remembered she'd just helped him. Thanks. No problem. Julie smiled. Ben smiled back, nervously. There was an awkward silence, then Julie spoke again. Well, see you in class, she said, walking away. Yeah, Ben said. He stood there for a minute after she left. That simple interaction somehow seemed very unreal to him. Then he realized something. I talked to her. Ben looked around to make sure the hallway was empty before doing a quick, victorious fist pump. He smiled broadly. To him, it didn't matter that she'd initiated it, or that he'd ended up being extremely awkward. He'd talked to her, and that was a step in the right direction. November, Year 3. Ever since the day Ben first spoke with Julie, she'd been saying hi to him whenever they happened to pass each other in the halls, and sometimes when they saw one another in class. Ben had been returning her greetings, but he could rarely bring himself to be the one to say hi first. Beyond that, they hadn't actually talked much beyond idle chat. Ben certainly wasn't any closer to getting over his crush on Julie. It bothered him that it had lasted this long. The few months he'd been obsessing over Julie felt like an eternity compared to the small amount of time he'd spent crushing on Kai. Although, if he were to truly admit it to himself, he still thought about Kai now and then. Every summer, he thought of asking his grandfather if they could visit her again, but he never did. Ben had almost forgotten why he'd wanted to talk to Julie in the first place. His theory was that he only liked her because she was a pretty, unapproachable girl, and he would lose interest if he actually got to talk to her. However, if anything, the few times he'd spoken with her actually made him like her more. She appeared to be a kind, genuine person, and Ben had trouble faulting her for that. Going into November, he resolved to talk to her more as opposed to less, as in actually talking to her beyond saying hello. This goal was similar to his previous one, only now he had the opposite intention. Rather than hoping to get over her, he was hoping to get closer to her. Maybe she'll go out with me. Ben didn't really have a solid grasp on the whole dating thing yet, but he knew it's what people did when they liked each other. Lots of kids in his grade were starting to date this year. Ben didn't want to be seen as the only loser who wasn't. And luckily for him, Julie didn't seem to have a boyfriend yet either. The day after deciding all of this, Ben walked into his homeroom with the intention of striking up a conversation with Julie. It sounded much simpler in his head. Rather than having a conversation with her, all he did was greet her as he walked past her desk before taking his seat like usual. He didn't say anything else to her for the rest of homeroom. So, despite finally being on speaking terms with her, he was still pretty much right back where he'd started. He knew he could talk to her, but he just couldn't make himself do it. Even after reversing his goal, he was failing just as hard. Ha! I win again, doofus. Gwen cheered as the TV screen announced her victory. She and Ben were at her house that day, and she'd just beaten him for the third time in a row. Ben sighed and put down his controller. What, you don't want a rematch? Come on, I bet I could beat you 10 times in a row, Gwen challenged with a cocky smile on her face. Ben shrugged and picked his controller back up. Okay, he said. Gwen furrowed her brow. Ben usually got much more competitive when she trash-talked him like that. Ordinarily, he'd respond with a few insults and a challenge of his own, or at least a bring it on. But he wasn't doing any of that. His mind was definitely elsewhere, and this wasn't the first time he'd acted like this recently. This isn't like him. All right, what's up? Gwen asked, turning off the TV. What? Ben asked, unconvincingly acting like he didn't know what she was talking about. You've been acting really weird lately. Weird for you, anyway. So what happened? Someone drop you on your head again? Gwen asked. She gave him the playful smirk the two of them usually shared when trading insults nowadays. Ben didn't return it. Instead, he had a distant look on his face, and he avoided meeting Gwen's gaze. Hey, really? Gwen began. Realizing Ben must actually be dealing with some sort of serious issue, Gwen's voice became softer and more empathetic, and her expression turned more serious, but gentle. She scooted closer to him on the couch. What's the matter? Ben really didn't want to say anything about the Julie problem, but at this point, he had to tell Gwen something. He'd been hoping he wasn't acting strange, but apparently whatever he was doing was enough for Gwen to notice. More importantly, he heard the genuine concern in his cousin's voice. She really did just want to help. He sighed. I'm having some trouble. At school, he admitted. Is one of your new classes really difficult? Gwen asked. Because, if it is, I can tutor you again. I don't know if our schools teach the exact same subjects, but they should be roughly. No, it's not a class, Ben said. I'm having problems with a person. Are JT and Cash bothering you again? Cause I swear, I will kick the ever-loving. No, no, that's not it either. Ben took a deep breath. He was really embarrassed to have to admit this to Gwen, but he decided not to lie to her. It's just, there's this girl in my class. And, I don't really know how to talk to her, I guess. His voice trailed off as he finished. Gwen's concerned face turned to a look of confusion for a moment. Wait, seriously? She burst out laughing. Ben glared at her. I'm sorry, Gwen apologized, still laughing. It's not funny. Yeah, it kind of is, Gwen insisted. I mean, seriously. The great Ben Tennyson, who's fought with aliens and monsters across the galaxy, succumbs to his greatest challenge yet, talking to a girl. Dun dun doo. Gwen gave her best movie trailer voice. Ben continued to glare at her. This was exactly why he hadn't wanted to tell her about this. What made it worse was he knew she was right. How could he constantly show bravery in the face of mortal danger, but still be scared of something as trivial as this? Well, what about you? Ben spat out. Gwen stopped laughing and looked at him questioningly. I don't see you talking to any guys. If it's so easy, where's your boyfriend, huh? Gwen was taken aback. That's different. Oh really? How? I can talk to guys. There just aren't any other guys I wanna talk to. Gwen was glaring at Ben now, but he could see she was blushing. Yeah, right, Ben said sarcastically. You're not any better at it than I am. They continued glaring at each other for a minute, then they both averted their gaze. There was an awkward silence as they both sat there. Then Gwen spoke. Hey, she said softly. Ben looked back at her. She didn't seem angry anymore. She looked apologetic. Look, I'm sorry for laughing, she said. Ben, not quite satisfied, still looked a little annoyed. What I was saying was, during the summer, I watch you throw yourself in harm's way on a daily basis, and it never scares you. If you can do that, you can talk to a girl. Ben suddenly felt a little bad. Sure, she'd laughed at him, but she was actually complimenting him right now. His expression softened. Oh, he said. Well, thanks. Gwen put her hand on his shoulder and smiled encouragingly. Can I ask you something? Ben asked. Sure. What? Gwen replied. What are the two secret words? Ben looked at her hopefully. The what? It took a moment for Gwen to realize what he was talking about. She burst out laughing again. Sorry, but I'm still not telling you. They're secret words, after all. At school the next day, Gwen went to her locker in between classes to grab a few things she needed. As she closed her locker and turned to walk down the hall, she noticed someone approaching her. She recognized him as a guy in her grade. She knew his name, but that's about it. He'd never spoken to her before, even though they'd been in several of the same classes since elementary school. Hey, Gwen. He greeted her. Oh. Hi. Gwen was caught off guard, not expecting him to say anything to her. What's up? He asked. Just getting my stuff. For class. Cool. So hey, are you doing anything Friday night? He asked all of a sudden. What? Why? Gwen knew exactly what he was asking, but she was a little flustered. I was just wondering if you wanted to go out with me, maybe. He said it like a question. He seemed very confident. He wasn't being unfriendly at all, and if Gwen thought about it, she'd probably say he was kind of cute. But she didn't say yes. Oh, well, no. Sorry. Gwen stuttered out. She tried to give him an apologetic smile as she turned him down. Oh, no worries. Maybe some other time, huh? Well, see ya. He walked away, apparently taking the rejection well. Gwen stood there for a second. Ben was right. She hadn't been lying to Ben when she told him he wasn't interested in any guys at her school, but she had lied about one thing. She wasn't any better at this stuff than he was. Once she got her bearings back, she started to walk down the hall to her next class. At the end of the hallway, she spotted Emily. The wheelchair-bound girl waved to her. Gwen waved back and approached her. Hi, Emily. Gwen greeted her. Hi, Gwen. Emily said as they headed to class together. Did I just see you shoot another guy down? She asked. Gwen turned red. Well, yeah. I guess, she replied. And what do you mean another guy? That's gotta be the third guy I've seen ask you out, and you haven't said yes to any of them. Gwen was embarrassed. Ever since she'd started 7th grade, guys had been hitting on her all of a sudden. Most of them were guys who'd never talked to her before, probably because she was known as something of a teacher's pet. But now, apparently they were interested in her. She didn't hate it exactly, she just didn't know where it came from and she had no idea how to handle it. You already got a boyfriend or something? Emily asked when Gwen didn't respond. Seriously? The only boy I even talk to is. No. Gwen said out loud to herself. Then she realized that was also her answer to Emily's question anyway. No. I just didn't wanna go out with any of those guys, she said. Emily seemed satisfied with that answer. Gwen was relieved, because she definitely didn't want to talk about it anymore. Back at home after school, Gwen started thinking about her conversation with Emily again, which she'd been doing on and off all day. Even if Ben was being foolish, she was more sympathetic of his girl problems now that she'd realized how many boy problems she had. Was it good that guys were suddenly talking to her, or was it bad? Should she try to get better at talking to them, or should she just not bother with it? Was she turning guys down because she didn't like them in particular, or did she not want to date at all? Gwen snapped out of her thoughts when her laptop began ringing like a telephone. She jumped in surprise at the sudden noise. Her screen showed she had a video chat request from Lucy. Lucy? She said out loud, not expecting a call from her. Wonder what she wants. Gwen hit the answer button, and a window popped up showing Lucy's smiling face. Hey. Lucy said, waving at the camera. Hey, Lucy. What's up? What's up? It's been months since I've seen you guys, that's what's up. Lucy said as if it should be obvious. So, fill me in. What's new? How have you been? I've been good. I love all my teachers so far this year, and I'm doing well in all my classes. Plus I've been progressing a lot with my karate lately, Gwen said, giving Lucy a brief update on her school life. What about you? You back at your old school now? Since Lucy had taken online classes for the last few months of the previous school year, Gwen was worried she might be having a hard time adjusting to being back in school. Lucy beamed. Oh, it's great. I get to hang out with all my friends again. And the boys. Gosh, the things you miss when you're not in school. Gwen chuckled and rolled her eyes. Of course boy crazy Lucy would be happy about that. Then Gwen realized something. Lucy might actually not be a bad person to ask about this stuff. After last summer, Gwen had come to realize there was a lot more to Lucy than she'd originally thought. On the surface, she might seem like she's just an energetic, easily excited, perpetually happy little girl. But deep down, she'd seen a lot more of the world than Gwen had, and she'd gained a certain wisdom from that. So, are you, dating anyone, then? Gwen asked. Lucy grinned like she was remembering something funny that she shouldn't say. I've gone out with a couple guys since I got back, but nothing big. What about you? Lucy asked. Me? No. I haven't done anything like that. Besides, well, we're not even teenagers yet, you know. Don't you think we're a little young for all that stuff anyway? Gwen said, voicing one of her main concerns. Lucy shrugged. Lots of kids at my school are dating now. Way more than last year, anyway. I just kinda figured this was when people started dating on this planet. That would be a really weird sentence if I didn't know Lucy was an alien. When do Lenopens usually start dating? Gwen asked. Well, Lucy began. I don't actually know. I haven't been to my home world in a few years. I assume it starts around roughly the same age, though. Humans and Lenopens have pretty similar life cycles. Gwen raised an eyebrow. Lucy can sound pretty smart when she wants to. Gwen shrugged. I always thought dating was more of a high school thing, but I guess not. She remembered something else she wanted to ask Lucy about. It's just kinda weird. Guys in my grade have been ignoring me for years, but now they all seem to wanna talk to me for some reason. I don't get it. She went for a sip of water in an attempt to seem more casual about this than she actually was. It's 'cause you've got a butt, Lucy said with a smirk. Gwen spit out her water and started coughing. Excuse me. You seriously haven't noticed? Lucy asked. Check yourself out in the mirror sometime, girl. Well, of course I have one. Yeah, but you've got a nice one. Lucy. Ask Ben, I'm sure he's noticed. Lucy. The course of the conversation was making Gwen extremely uncomfortable. It wasn't exactly the sage advice she'd been hoping for. Lucy laughed like crazy. All right, I'm sorry, she half-heartedly apologized. I'm not wrong about the guys, though. Gwen rolled her eyes. I'm serious. Lucy insisted. If the guys weren't into that stuff before, they are now. And they're starting to notice it with girls like you. Heck, I made myself a little curvier this year, and guys have been all over me, too. Gwen was a bit confused by that statement. Lucy smiled knowingly. That's what's so nice about being a shapeshifter. I'll always be hot. Lucy waggled her eyebrows at Gwen. Gwen face-palmed, but she laughed lightly under her breath. Okay. You're probably right. Sort of. Puberty is a harsh mistress. Gwen considered asking Lucy if Lenopens went through some sort of puberty too, but she decided the answer would probably be gross. So, is there someone you want to date? Lucy asked. Gwen looked like she was struggling to process something. No, not really. I've been asked out by a few guys recently, but I didn't really know any of them. And I don't mind not having a boyfriend, you know. Plus, I don't really know what I'm supposed to do when guys talk to me like that. I don't know. Lucy looked at her thoughtfully. Well, if you don't wanna date, don't date. She said it like it was as simple as that. Talking to guys like that takes practice, but it's no big deal if you don't plan to date any of them anyway, right? So you don't think it matters if I don't want to do something that pretty much everyone else wants to do right now? Gwen asked. Nope, Lucy said. Besides, you're not saying you don't want a boyfriend ever, are you? Gwen thought about it. I don't know. Maybe I will eventually, she decided. Exactly. Lucy said. When the right guy comes along, and you actually realize who he is, then, well, why not give it a try? Gwen looked at her skeptically. Lucy's wording was definitely odd, but Gwen wasn't sure what she was implying. Lucy smiled mischievously. Plus, that just means more guys for me. Gwen smiled and laughed. Well, I'm sure you've got your share of guys after you. Some of the girls, too, Lucy added. Wait, what? Gwen asked, bewildered. Lucy waggled her eyebrows suggestively again. Really? Lucy nodded. Oh, brother. Gwen facepalmed and laughed again. You're really something, Lucy. Something awesome. Just take things a little slow, okay? Save some stuff for when you're, you know, a teenager at least. And definitely wait until high school for some other stuff, Gwen cautioned, deciding it was her turn to give a little advice. You mean sex? Lucy asked with a mischievous smile. Lucy. Gwen looked over her shoulder, suddenly paranoid that her parents might be overhearing their conversation. Don't even say it. Lucy laughed. Relax. Camille would kill me if I did anything like that. From there, Gwen managed to steer the conversation to more mundane topics. She and Lucy spent the next half hour catching up on other parts of their lives and discussing other things. Finally, it came time for Lucy to get going. Okay, Gwen said. Well, it was great to hear from you again. And, thanks for the advice, with the whole dating thing. Despite some other less pleasant topics that were raised during that discussion, Gwen actually felt a bit better about her situation. She'd been right about Lucy after all. Partially. Lucy smiled warmly. No problem, Gwen. Anytime. She paused for a second. And if you ever want to talk about anything else, like, maybe something that feels even weirder to talk about, you can always tell me anything. Once again, Gwen felt like Lucy was hinting at something, but she couldn't quite put her finger on it. However, she was glad to hear the standing offer. She smiled back at her. Thanks, I really appreciate that. And same to you. The two of them said their goodbyes, and hung up the video chat. Gwen leaned back in her chair and looked at the ceiling. That was helpful. A little weird, but helpful. Gwen decided that, for now, her plan was to not worry about guys and dating anymore. If any more guys asked her out, she'd just turn them down like always. Sooner or later, they should stop asking her. Maybe she'd be more into the idea at some point, but for now, she wasn't gonna care. I've only had a friend for a year. No way I could handle a boyfriend. Gwen thought for a second. Friends. I have two. Lucy is definitely my friend now, too. Gwen remembered something else Lucy had mentioned. Nervously, she looked down at her chair. She couldn't see anything from this angle. She looked over at her mirror, then sighed as she stood up. I can't believe I'm doing this. Doing as Lucy suggested, she walked over to the mirror. Even with no one else around, this was embarrassing. She turned around and looked over her shoulder. Almost immediately, Gwen blushed furiously, then ran to sit back down in her chair. Stupid puberty. The next day was incredibly awkward for Gwen. With the revelation that her body now attracted attention, she constantly felt paranoid that all eyes were on her. Sitting in class, she'd glance around the room every 5 seconds. If she saw anyone turning to face away from her, she'd become worried that they'd been staring at her. Whenever one of her classes ended, she pretended to be looking through her backpack until the rest of the class started to leave. This way, she could be the last one out of the room and nobody would be walking behind her. Gwen wasn't even sure why she was feeling so self-conscious about this. She didn't even feel like it was particularly wrong for guys to be checking her out. From what Lucy had said, it sounded like any new attention she was getting was rather positive. Lucy even said she was getting a lot of the same attention, and she loved it. But Gwen didn't feel that way. Compared to the previous years when everyone had ignored her, this was just too big of a change. She was really glad to get out of school that day. She practically ran to meet Ben. When she saw him at the park, she had to hide her relief. In her mind, he was the one guy she would feel comfortable around, but that definitely wasn't something she was gonna say to him. "Hey, doofus," she greeted him. Ben, who had been fiddling with the Omnitrix, glanced up. He smiled and looked at her questioningly. "Sup, dweeb? What are you so excited about?" Nothing," Gwen said. She realized she'd been grinning like an idiot just from seeing him, so she straightened her face. Ben stood up. "All right, let's go to my house," he suggested. "Okay." Gwen agreed. They began walking together. "So, have you heard from Lucy at all lately?" Gwen decided to ask. Nope. "Why? Have you?" Gwen nodded. "She Skyped me yesterday. She's just as crazy as ever, in case you were wondering." Ben laughed. "Yeah, I figured." As he spoke, he reached up to scratch the back of his head. His arm stuck out towards Gwen, which caused her to notice something. Ben has muscles. Not huge muscles. But compared to the old scrawny Ben, his arms definitely had a little more definition than they used to. Gwen stared at his arm for the few seconds it was held up, and then continued to stare at it after he put it back down. Gwen tore her gaze away from Ben and shook her head, snapping herself out of it. She was glad he was walking a little bit in front of her, because she was having a mini freak out. "I can't believe I just did that." Gwen took a deep breath to calm herself down. "I just noticed, that's all. Not like I was checking him out or anything." Even just thinking those words made her cringe. She started coughing. "You okay?" Ben asked. "I'm fine." Gwen straightened up and put on a very fake smile. From the way he looked at her, she could tell he thought she was acting weird, but he just shrugged it off. When they got to Ben's house, Ben opened his front door. Gwen walked inside ahead of him. Their plan was to play some video games, which meant going upstairs to Ben's room. But when Gwen got to the stairs, she froze. Up until a few moments ago, Gwen had been under the assumption that all the annoying changes her body was going through, the ones that apparently made all the guys at school wanna look at her now, were completely unnoticeable to Ben. They're cousins, after all. But after noticing his muscles on the walk here, suddenly Gwen was worried that Lucy had been right about something else. Maybe Ben had noticed. And now, that was making her afraid to walk up the stairs in front of him. "What's the matter?" Ben asked, seeing her standing motionless. "Nothing." Gwen quickly stepped to the side. She gave him an awkward smile and gestured for him to lead the way. "After you," she said. Ben looked really confused, but went upstairs in front of her nonetheless. They spent the next hour or two playing video games. As usual, they only played games where they could fight or compete against each other in some way. They forgot to keep score, but they were both pretty certain they were the victor. Once they grew bored of the game, they stopped. Ben leaned back and stretched as he pondered what they should do next. "So, how are things going with that girl you're trying to talk to?" Gwen decided to take the opportunity to question him about his issues at school. She felt kind of bad for laughing at him the other day, so she thought maybe she could make it up to him by giving him a little advice. Ben immediately looked uncomfortable. Well, I talk to her now and then. Just not, like, anything more than small talk, I guess." Gwen wasn't expecting him to have made a ton of progress in just a few days. She also realized that she didn't know anything about this girl Ben liked. "What's her name?" "Julie." "What's she like?" Even though she knew she shouldn't be, Gwen was curious about what Ben liked in a girl. "She's nice. And smart. And pretty." Ben, who had been staring at the wall, turned to look at Gwen as he finished speaking. Gwen felt weird. She'd been worried all day about being stared at, but this felt different. "Does he think I'm pretty too?" She considered that thought for a second, and then she was thoroughly embarrassed by it. "What are you staring at, doofus?" Gwen asked accusingly. "Nothing," Ben said, averting his gaze. "Wanna play another game?" Gwen suggested, hurriedly changing the subject. "Sure," Ben agreed quickly. He got up to switch out the last game for another one. Gwen was hoping to forget about that whole exchange and focus on something completely unrelated. She also hoped Ben hadn't realized any of the weird things she'd thought of that today. She sighed quietly to herself. "Something's seriously wrong with me." December, Year 3. "What about?" "No, not that." "Oh, that might." "Nah, never mind." Ben walked through the mall, looking in every store window he passed. There was only a week left before his and Gwen's birthday, and he still hadn't gotten her anything. Last year, he had gotten her a gift. But naturally, they'd had a fight on their birthday, which had made him put off giving it to her until February. Ben remembered that day very clearly. She was so happy. It still amazed him that something so small had seemed so important to her, but regardless, he wanted to see her like that again. And he wanted to do it right this year. He wanted to give her birthday present to her on their actual birthday, not 2 months later. However, doing it right meant choosing the right gift, too. That wasn't easy. He'd considered another summer photo album, but decided that would be unoriginal and he didn't have many new photos to use anyway. For the past few weeks, he'd been trying to come up with a better idea for a gift. Every time he hung out with Gwen, he tried to figure out if she wanted or needed anything without actually asking her. "What can I get her? What can I do? I gotta do something, right?" After passing by several bookstores and other places Ben thought might have something for her, he spotted a magic shop. It was a little unorthodox, but that was something in Gwen's area of interest. But they wouldn't have real magic stuff here, would they? Deciding he had nothing to lose, Ben stepped inside the shop and looked around. It was filled with strange-looking objects and trinkets. Some of it was kind of creepy. A lot of the stuff looked really old, but none of it struck him as being particularly magical. However, among all of the apparently useless junk, he spotted something that looked familiar. Is that? The setup for Ben and Gwen's birthday was similar to how it had been in previous years. It was just them, their parents, and their grandfather, all gathered at Ben's house. I'm now officially a teenager. Ben was in a very good mood. In his mind, turning 13 meant people would hopefully stop treating him like a little kid. He could finally go to PG-13 movies and buy rated T games without needing his parents. And, with any luck, he'd get some really cool presents today. If the presents were anything like the cake, they'd have to be good. Ben's parents had made a gigantic chocolate and vanilla cake, elaborately decorated with different colored frosting spelling out Happy 13th Birthday Ben and Gwen. It sat on their kitchen table, which Ben was hovering around, dying to try it. He was about to ask if he could just have a piece before the others arrived, but the doorbell rang, so he and his parents went to answer it. Hi, Frank. Natalie. Sandra greeted Gwen's parents. It's great to see you, Sandra. Thank you for having us. Frank politely returned the greeting. His wife simply nodded as they stepped inside, carrying several presents. From where Ben was standing, he couldn't see Gwen. She must have been standing behind her parents. The adults exchanged handshakes and hugs, saying how nice it was to see each other again. Ben just smiled at them, and patiently waited for Gwen to come inside. After a few moments, Gwen's parents stepped away from the doorway. Ben still couldn't see outside of it from this angle, but his mother was still standing close to it. Well, hi, Gwen. Come on in. Sandra gestured through the doorway, seeming a little confused about why Gwen was still standing out on the front step. With a nervous smile on her face, Gwen stepped inside. She's wearing a dress. Other than while shopping for clothes and on formal occasions, Ben had never seen Gwen dressed like that. Seeing her now, he was rather caught off guard. Ben's mother also took note of Gwen's appearance. Oh, sweetie, you look beautiful. Gwen blushed, but she smiled. Thanks, Aunt Sandra. Her father stepped beside her and laughed. Doesn't she? Ah, my little girl's all grown up, he said, ruffling her short red hair. Dad. Gwen complained, pushing his hand off her head. Even after all these years, he was still really good at embarrassing her. The parents continued to chat and exchange pleasantries for a few minutes. Here, let me help you with that, Carl said, taking one of the presents Frank was carrying off his hands. Let's put these down over here. Dad should be here soon. Anyone want some coffee? They went into the next room, leaving Ben and Gwen standing where they were. Gwen made eye contact with Ben for the first time since she'd arrived. She was still near the door, and he was practically on the other side of the room. She gave him a shy smile. The two of them stood there wordlessly. A million thoughts whirred through Ben's head, but he wasn't sure if any of them made enough sense to put into words. He could hear their parents talking over in the kitchen, but all of that was just background noise right now. But the moment didn't last long. What are you looking at, doofus? Gwen didn't sound particularly angry. Ben could tell she was simply embarrassed, like she always was in situations like this. Nothing, Ben said, taking his eyes off of her. I I was a little surprised you're wearing a dress is all. Well, I am. Gwen crossed her arms defiantly. Why? Ben asked. Gwen glared at him. I just wanted to look nice for my 13th birthday. Gwen's words became less certain as she spoke. Well, you look like a dweeb. Gwen glared at him again, but she saw the playful smirk on his face. It made her smile too after a moment. She began laughing, which was a relief to Ben. He'd thought Gwen was about to get really mad at him, but now she seemed much more comfortable than she did before. I still look better than you do, Gwen countered. What are those? The same pants you've been wearing the last 2 weeks. Doesn't matter, I'm Ben freaking Tennyson, he said, striking a Superman pose. I always look good. Gwen laughed at that, but she also looked away shyly. A silence followed. Ben could tell Gwen was nervous about something. She was fidgeting uncomfortably, gripping her dress. I guess she was hoping for a compliment or something. That wasn't something Ben liked to do very much. Jokingly insulting her always came more naturally to him. Well. Ben looked like he wanted to say something. Gwen tilted her head and smiled encouragingly, but just as Ben opened his mouth to speak, the doorbell rang again. They both looked at the door, then at each other again. Grandpa! They said excitedly in unison. Ben rushed towards the door as Gwen moved to open it. Sure enough, Max was standing on the front step. Grandpa! They shouted again. Gwen lunged forward and gave him a hug. Ben also stepped forward. Max laughed at the warm welcome his grandchildren were giving him. One hand was carrying a stack of gifts, so he returned Gwen's hug with one arm, then reached over to pat Ben on the shoulder. Happy birthday, kids, he said. The sound of footsteps told them their parents were coming to greet Max as well. Hi, Dad. Frank and Kyle both said, stepping forward to take a few of the presents Max was carrying. With the addition of Max's presents, Ben and Gwen now had a stack of gifts larger than they'd ever had on any of their previous birthdays. As they looked over the pile of presents, huge grins spread across their faces and they started playfully punching each other in the shoulder out of excitement. So, I take it we'll be starting with presents? Max said, easily taking notice of the kids' eagerness. Yes. Definitely. As predicted, their parents and their grandfather apparently considered their 13th birthday to be an important milestone, so they'd gotten them quite a lot of nice gifts this year. Among other things, Ben received a new game console with several games as well as some rare trading cards he'd been looking for. Gwen got a brand new laptop, some books, and a new set of sparring gear for karate. As they finished opening their presents, Ben realized this was about the time his grandfather would usually ask him and Gwen if they had anything for each other. However, he didn't ask this time. Ben was a little confused by this. He glanced at Gwen and saw she wore a similar confused expression, which made him think she must have been thinking the same thing. Of course, this year, Ben actually did have a present for Gwen. However, even though he was getting a little more comfortable being friendly with Gwen in front of his family, giving her a gift in front of them was still way too much for him to handle. Making eye contact with Gwen, he silently mouthed the word later to her. She gave him an understanding nod. What do you say, kids? Max urged them. Ben and Gwen turned to their parents. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. You're welcome. Now, who wants cake? Kyle suggested. Ben was the first one to the kitchen, with the others following after him. He grabbed a paper plate and set it down next to the cake. Then he grabbed the cutting knife and cut a piece for himself. However, as he turned to place the slice of cake onto his plate, his path was blocked. Gwen stood there, holding up her plate and smiling expectantly at him. Fine. Even though he was eager to try it himself, Ben shrugged and gave her the slice. Thanks, Ben. Gwen said kindly before heading over to take a seat at the table. Sure, Ben said, cutting another slice of cake for himself. But as he did, he noticed his grandfather standing to the other side of him, giving him a look of approval. All right, but this is the last time. You want a piece, Grandpa? Ben offered. Certainly, Ben. That's very kind of you, Max said. Whatever. After serving a slice to his grandfather, Ben quickly cut one more slice and placed it on his plate. He didn't want to get stuck cutting cake for all the parents as well, so he quickly took his piece and went to the end of the table to sit down next to Gwen. This is delicious, Gwen said, scooping up another bite of cake with her fork. I sure hope so, Ben said, taking his first bite. That is good. It reminds me of that bakery we went to was that in Pittsburgh? Nah, that was Boston. Right. Their parents soon joined them at the table, and it quickly became an ordinary Tennyson family meal, although the mood was noticeably lighter than Ben expected. When Ben and Gwen were finished with their cake, their parents were still talking amongst themselves. Ben saw this as a good opportunity. Now's as good a time as any to give her her gift. Hey Gwen, you wanna try out one of my new games with me? He asked. Gwen got the message. Okay, she agreed. I just need to get something out of the car first. She stood up, cleared her place, then went to tap her father on the shoulder. Daddy, can I borrow the keys? Sure, Frank said, reaching into his pocket. Just have the car back by 9. Gwen chuckled at her dad's joke. Thanks, she said after he handed her the keys. As Gwen went to the front door, Ben gathered up the presents he'd gotten from everyone else and headed for the stairs. I'll be up in my room, he said to Gwen. In his room, Ben closed the door and dropped his gifts in a pile on the floor. Then he opened his closet. Hidden behind some junk was a small, neatly wrapped box. He grabbed it and held it up. I hope she likes it. He was still unsure about his choice of gift. He knew it was going to need some explaining, and even then it might seem kind of dumb. For some reason, it felt like it was taking Gwen a long time to come upstairs, even though he really only had to wait a minute or two. The anticipation was making him nervous. He thought it was strange that something as simple as giving a birthday gift to his cousin would cause him to worry this much. A knock sounded at his door. It startled him even though he was expecting it. He quickly walked across his room and let Gwen in. Gwen stepped into the room slowly. She was holding a small wrapped box, about the same size as the one Ben had. She seemed very uncertain. He could tell right away she felt as awkward about this as he did. So, Ben started to say something, but Gwen held her present up into his face. Happy birthday, Gwen said. Oh. Ben put down the box he was holding and took the present from Gwen. Thanks, he said, tearing off a layer of wrapping paper. Underneath was a small, white, jewelry gift box. He stared at it for a moment. Go ahead, you can open it, Gwen told him. Ben nodded to her, then opened the box. Inside was a small, golden locket. Ben grabbed it by the necklace chain and lifted it up, examining the round, golden case on the end of it. I gotta say, I wasn't expecting jewelry, he said, not sure what else to say. Gwen gave him a nervous smile. It's magic. I put a protection spell on it, she explained. Ben raised his eyebrow curiously. Well, she went on, I'm not always gonna be there to save you when you screw up, you know. So, I thought this might help. Even though Gwen was kind of insulting him, Ben smiled at that. Looking back down at the locket, he realized the round part opened up. With a click, he opened it. Inside of it was a picture Lucy had taken of the two of them last summer. They each had an arm around the other's shoulders, but they were also holding up two fingers, giving each other bunny ears. The spell, it works better if the charm holds an image of both the caster and the wearer, she explained further. Ben didn't say anything, but her face went red. Well, you don't have to open it. Or even show that you're wearing it. You can just keep it under your shirt. Gwen started to defend herself, expecting Ben to think jewelry was a stupid gift. No. I mean, yeah, whatever, that's fine. Now Ben's face was turning red. He wasn't sure what he did, but he didn't mean to upset her like that. He slipped the necklace over his head and let it hang there. It was nearly weightless, so he'd barely notice it was there. Then he slipped it into his shirt. It was hidden completely. He put his hand on his chest where the locket was and felt it underneath his shirt. He wasn't sure what kind of magic Gwen had worked on it, but he felt safer already. Thanks, Gwen, he said seriously. Gwen returned the smile, although she still looked somewhat bashful. Well, yeah, I mean, you're welcome. You know, it's funny, Ben said, picking up his gift and handing it to Gwen. I got you something similar, actually. Gwen took the present out of his hands. What do you mean? She asked. Open it and see. Curious, Gwen peeled off the wrapping paper. Sure enough, it was a similar jewelry gift box. She opened it and her eyes went wide. Wait, is this a charm of Bezel? Gwen took the small grey stone with strange markings on it out of the box and held it up. Looks a lot like one, doesn't it? Ben said. I don't think it's real, though. Or at least not one of the originals. Gwen had destroyed the original charms 3 years ago when she'd first discovered magic. She knew it had been the safest way to keep them out of the wrong hands, but after becoming a sorceress herself, part of her had always wondered what would have happened if she'd kept them. I found it in a magic shop, Ben continued to explain. I think it's a replica. I thought you might be able to use it to remake one of the charms. Gwen looked at him with surprise. Remake one? Remember when we met ourselves from the future? Ben asked. Gwen nodded grimly. She hadn't been too happy with the way things had worked out in that original timeline. Well, future, you had the charms of Bezel. I don't know how you got them, but I think maybe you can get them again. Maybe you can remake all of them, starting with that one, Ben explained. I don't know. Gwen stared uncertainly at the stone in her hand. You've gotten so strong over the years, Ben told her. I want to help you get even stronger. Gwen stared at him. Ben held his breath. He had no idea how she would take this. Maybe she'd be angry with him for trying to tempt her into becoming some kind of power-hungry dark wizard or something. But instead, still clutching the stone, Gwen lunged forward and hugged him. She stayed there with her head buried in his shoulder as they hugged. Ben didn't know what to do in this situation, but he smiled, figuring his present was a good one after all. After a moment of silence, Gwen spoke. "Thanks, Ben," she said, not pulling out of the hug yet. "Happy birthday, Gwen." "Happy birthday." They stepped apart from each other, apparently just realizing how long they'd been hugging for. Ben cleared his throat. "So, you wanna try out some of my new games for real?" he suggested. Gwen had forgotten that was their pretense for sneaking away from the rest of their family. Yeah. Sure, she agreed. As Ben moved to set up his new console, he turned his back to Gwen. Once it was ready, he turned back around. He saw Gwen staring at the charm, smiling to herself, but also looking a little uncertain. "Something wrong?" he asked. Gwen shook her head, slipping the stone into her pocket. Ben wasn't entirely convinced, but she seemed happy enough. I guess she liked it after all. Ben was happy to hear Joel and Camille were hosting the Tennyson family Christmas party again this year. When he first heard the news, he was really excited to go to Lucy's house once more. He always wanted to see more of the plumber/alien side of the family, especially since he didn't have nearly enough of that in his life in Bellwood. It had been months since he'd used the Omnitrix for anything more interesting than cleaning his room really fast or opening a particularly stubborn bottle of ketchup. He knew he wouldn't really get a chance to use it at the Christmas party either, since his parents and some other members of the family were still in the dark about such things. However, he was hoping to at least get a chance to talk with Joel, Camille, and Lucy about it some more. Sitting in the back seat as his parents drove, Ben put his hand to his chest, feeling the locket Gwen had given him through his shirt. In the 2 weeks since he'd received it, he'd been doing that a lot. He didn't even realize when he did it. Much like fiddling with the Omnitrix, it just became something he did when he was bored or stressed. When Ben and his parents arrived, Joel was there to greet them at the door. "Carl, Sandra, Ben. Glad you could make it, come on in." He stepped aside and gestured into the house. As Ben entered, Joel called out to Lucy. "Lucy. Ben's here." Joel was interrupted by Lucy, who seemed to pop out of nowhere. She gave him a quick hug before looking up at his parents next. "Carl and Sandra are here too," she said. "Hi, sweetheart," Sandra said, smiling sweetly at the energetic girl. "Good to see you again, Lucy." Carl reached out to ruffle Lucy's hair. Lucy giggled, then grabbed Ben by the arm and pulled him further into her house. "Come along, my dashing ring bearer." "Don't call me that." Ben remembered back to his awkward dance with Lucy at Joel and Camille's wedding. Lucy gave him a playful smirk, showing that was her intention. As Lucy led Ben through her house, they got stopped by several of Ben's relatives. Just like last year, most of them were people he'd been seeing at holiday parties and family gatherings his whole life, but he still didn't really know them. All of them seemed to love Lucy, though. She had become a very welcome addition to the family. Many of Joel and Camille's friends from outside the family were there too. Lucy introduced Ben to several of them, which he didn't like at first. But after meeting a few of them, Lucy told him a bit more about them. "That one over there. She's a plumber," Lucy explained. "Ooh, and that guy, he is too. I heard he took on a Tetramond in a fist fight once." "Seriously?" Ben was amazed. "Wow. I didn't know Joel had such cool friends." "I know. Aren't they?" Lucy looked across the room at Joel, beaming with pride. "You want something to eat? There's like a gazillion desserts in there," she said, pointing towards the kitchen. There's these really good brownies we didn't have last year, too. Come on. Without waiting for an answer, Lucy grabbed Ben's hand and pulled him into the kitchen to grab some food. They each loaded up a plate with desserts and took a can of soda. Now, where can we? She scanned the room. Let's go over here, she said, leading Ben to a closed door off to the side of the party. Inside was a quiet, empty room with some couches where they could sit and eat. After they put their food down on the table, Lucy playfully shoved Ben onto the couch. Phew. Man, there's a lot of 'em, huh? Lucy said, plopping herself down next to him. I guess even she gets exhausted at these family get-togethers. Lucy yawned, but her smile quickly returned. So, how's life? She asked Ben. Ben finished swallowing a big bite of his brownie before answering. Pretty awesome. I'm dying to use this thing more, though. Ben held up his left arm and pointed to the Omnitrix. You mean you're not off fighting crime every night? Lucy asked. Ben laughed. I wish. Me and Gwen barely ever do that during the year. People would figure out we live in Bellwood, and that wouldn't end well. Gotta keep those secret identities secret, huh? Just like all the best superheroes. Ben grabbed a cookie from his plate. As he took a bite, he turned his head and realized Lucy was leaning in close to him. What are you doing? He asked, leaning away from her. Just wondering. Wondering what? Ben couldn't tell what she was talking about. Wondering if you've got a girl in your life yet. Lucy gave him a wicked smile. Ben started coughing. There's no mistletoe here, Ben reminded her as he quickly glanced around the room for any, remembering what she'd done last Christmas. Lucy leaned away from him, giggling. Come on, tell me. Lucy insisted. Ben took a sip of his drink and calmed down. Well, not exactly. Ooh, that means there's something going on. Ben shifted uncomfortably. Well, yeah. I've got someone I wanna go out with, I guess. Yes. Aha. I knew it. Lucy victoriously jumped a little in her seat. So, what's she like? Well, Ben thought about it. He still wasn't used to talking about this. She's nice. Lucy nodded, urging him to go on. She's really smart. Lucy nodded again, seeming very excited. And, she's pretty, I guess. Lucy squealed in delight. What does she look like? Ben glanced up to the side for a moment, trying to picture Julie. Well, she's got short hair. Aha. Lucy leaned closer to him. She wears this pink hoodie all the time, Ben said, realizing he'd rarely ever seen her without it. Lucy's smile abruptly faded into a look of confusion. What? Ben asked, not sure what he'd said that she thought was so weird. Lucy facepalmed and leaned back against the armrest of the couch. Oh my God, you're hopeless, she muttered under her breath, moaning like she was disappointed. Seriously, what? Ben asked again, not quite being able to make out what she was saying. Lucy stayed there like that for a moment, then suddenly leaned forward again. Nothing. She said. Her smile had returned, but it seemed less genuine than before. I just figured you had a different type. What do you got against hoodies? What? No, it's not that. Lucy absent-mindedly toyed with her hair. Oh. Ben thought he'd figured it out. No, I got nothing against blondes or anything, he said, forgetting he'd never mentioned the color of Julie's hair. Lucy looked confused again, then noticed what she was doing with her hair. Oh. Right. She giggled. So you like my hair too then, huh? She gave him a playful smile. Ben nervously scooted away from her on the couch. Lucy laughed. She tilted her head back, and with both hands, she flipped her hair up. Suddenly, it turned a dark brown. How about now? Like it? She asked, rotating her head back and forth to whip her new hair around. Lucy. Ben opened his eyes wide in alarm and looked around to make sure no one else was here to see her shape-shifting. No. With another turn of her head, Lucy's hair shrank down to shoulder length. Maybe you just like this hairdo. She'd never actually seen Julie, so the hairstyle she decided to mimic was Gwen's. Unconsciously, her hair also began to turn red. Ben stared at her with an uncomfortable expression on his face. Lucy giggled and shook her head. Her hair slowly grew and changed back to its normal blonde color. Lighten up, Ben. I'm just messing with you. Ben gave her a nervous smile. Nah, it's cool. So, what's this crush of yours think of you? Lucy decided to continue her interrogation. Ben shrugged. I don't know. I mean, we talk at school, a little. She seems to like me. Oh, Ben. Talking to girls at school. You ladies' man. Lucy joked. Ben smiled. What can I say? I can't keep the ladies off me. I'll say. Lucy stood up on the couch, then tipped forward, letting herself fall on top of Ben. Ow. Whoa, hey. Ben complained as he and Lucy both laughed. Off to the side, they heard a door open. Gwen stepped into the room. She had a moment to register the way Lucy was rolling around on top of Ben. She looked back and forth between them with an unamused expression on her face. Do I even wanna know? Gwen's here. Lucy shouted, rolling off of Ben and falling to the floor with a thud. She quickly recovered, standing up and running over to greet Gwen. Hold up. Gwen held up her hand, stopping Lucy in her tracks. I know how this goes. Normal hug, please. Lucy giggled. Oh, fine. Spoil sport. She stepped in and gave Gwen a much gentler hug than usual. Thank you, Gwen said, stepping back. It's good to see you, Lucy. Then she turned to Ben. You too, doofus. Right back, Asher, dweeb. Sorry I'm late, by the way, Gwen said to them both. It took a little longer to get ready than I expected. I'll bet it did, Lucy said, quickly circling around Gwen, examining her. You look gorgeous. Gwen looked uncomfortable, but she still smiled. Really? Totally. Lucy confirmed. I didn't even think you wore makeup. And I don't think I've ever seen you in a skirt before either. Lucy reached for the hem of Gwen's skirt, but Gwen grabbed her by the wrist. Don't even think about it. Fine, Lucy groaned melodramatically. Ooh. Shifting gears entirely, she grabbed her plate of desserts off the table and held it up to Gwen. Did you get anything to eat? Want some of mine? There's lots more in the kitchen if you want. It's all really, really good. Deciding to pretend that little incident didn't just happen, Gwen accepted Lucy's offer and took a cookie off her plate. So, what have you guys been up to? Gwen asked, taking a bite. Not much, Ben said. I just got here a little bit ago. I introduced him to all of Camille and Joel's cool friends, Lucy explained. Oh, Did you meet any of them on your way in? She asked Gwen. Gwen shook her head. I saw a bunch of people I didn't know, but I came to find you two as soon as I got here. Or, you should go meet some of them, Lucy said. They're real alien fighting badasses, like you guys. She gestured to both Ben and Gwen. None of them are magic like you, though, she said to Gwen. Then she smiled and gasped. Is that magic? It's so pretty. Lucy pointed to the replica charm of bezel that Gwen was wearing on her necklace. Gwen clutched the charm and looked down at it. Yeah. She smiled and glanced at Ben. It is. Can I try it on? Lucy asked. No. Gwen said quickly. Lucy laughed. Okay, okay. It'd probably turn me into a frog or something anyway, right? Lucy reached out and poked the charm. Poke, she said out loud. Then she gasped. Oh no. She said dramatically. Suddenly, she morphed into a pile of mud, shrank down, and took on the shape of a little green frog. Ben and Gwen stared at her, stunned. Lucy croaked. It took them a second to register that Lucy was just using her shape-shifting to mess with them again. Lucy, Gwen said in a quiet but scolding voice. Change back, now. You can't be doing this while my family's here. The frog shape-shifted back into Lucy, only now she was wearing Gwen's clothes. Ribbit, she said with a smirk. Ben was laughing pretty hard, but Gwen was still freaking out, thinking her parents would walk in any second and find out Lucy was a shape-shifting alien. Lucy, come on. What? I like it. We're like twins. Lucy spun around and curtsied for Gwen. What do you think? She asked, turning to Ben. Pfft, last thing I need is two dweebs. Yeah, right. I bet that's what you dream about, Lucy countered. Gwen flicked Lucy on the side of the head. Ow. Quit being weird. Oh, you guys are no fun, Lucy said. Relenting, she shape-shifted her clothes back into what she'd been wearing before. There, better. Better. Gwen sighed, but she was smiling slightly. Having calmed down, the three of them sat down on the couch and continued eating their desserts. They talked about school and got caught up on what had been going on with each other's lives since going their separate ways at the end of summer. Ben avoided bringing up Julie. Gwen didn't bring her up either, and neither did Lucy, which was surprising to Ben. I was expecting them to gossip about it just to annoy me or something. In the middle of their conversation, Lucy jumped up in her seat suddenly and exclaimed, "Ooh!" Like she just had a bright idea. I know something we can do tonight. She waved her hands inward, beckoning Ben and Gwen to lean in conspiratorially. Let's go snag some eggnog. She whispered. Yeah. Ben seemed enthusiastic about the idea. That stuff's usually alcoholic, Gwen said. Our parents aren't gonna let us have any. Duh, Ben said. Who says they gotta know? Joel made a big batch of it, Lucy said. There's probably still plenty left in the kitchen. We'll just grab a glass of it when no one's looking. Gwen didn't like this idea. I'm not going. My mom will kill me if anyone catches us, Gwen said. Pfft, fine. Be a chicken, Ben said, standing up and walking to the door. Lucy got up off the couch and followed him. Don't worry, she said, turning back to Gwen. I'll grab a glass for you. She winked as she and Ben slipped out of the room. After a quick stealth mission through the mob of Tennyson family and friends, Ben and Lucy returned, cups of eggnog in hand. Success! Lucy cheered. Nobody saw us, Ben proclaimed, holding up his glass triumphantly. See? Piece of cake. Lucy handed a glass to Gwen. Here you go, she said. Ah, thanks, Gwen said. She looked into the glass. Inside was a thick, white drink with cinnamon sprinkled on top of it. It didn't look that appetizing. Lucy looked excited, but Ben looked about the same as Gwen. Have either of you ever tried this before? Gwen asked. Nope. Lucy said. Ben just shook his head. Welp, here we go. Lucy held up her cup, signaling the others to clink their glasses together. To saving the world, and stuff. She said. Yeah. Ben cheered, knocking his glass into Lucy's. Yeah, Gwen said, following along. Together, the three of them took a gulp of their drink. Ben and Gwen started coughing and gagging immediately. This tastes awful, Gwen said. So gross, Ben agreed. Lucy, on the other hand, was chugging hers down in one go. Ah! She said, like she'd just taken a refreshing sip of cold water. I don't know what you guys are talking about, this stuff's delicious. Are you kidding me? Gwen asked. Why do people drink this crap? Ben was still coughing. He and Gwen placed their glasses on the table in disgust. Lucy giggled, standing there with a dreamy smile on her face. Gwen looked concerned. Lucy, how exactly does alcohol affect Len Opens? Hell if I know. Lucy said, but she didn't look in the least bit worried. Ooh. Lucy said, just remembering something. Gwen, I still need to introduce you to Camille and Joel's friends. Gwen was hesitant. No, you really don't have to. Trust me, you'll love 'em. Ben, back me up here, Lucy insisted. Ben shrugged. They're pretty cool, I guess. But I'm up for whatever. All right, Gwen agreed. Cool. Lucy grabbed Gwen by the hand and pulled her to the door. You come too, Ben. The three of them left their out-of-the-way room and rejoined the adults in the rest of the house. Lucy led them around the party like she'd done with Ben earlier, introducing Gwen to many of the same people Ben had already met. They also ran into their parents and chatted with them for a bit. There were even some Tennyson relatives who Lucy hadn't met yet, so Ben and Gwen got to introduce her to them. She was as enthusiastic about meeting them as she always was, and immediately treated them like real family. Since most of the people they talked to were people Ben had met before, he wasn't really paying attention a lot of the time. Lucy noticed his eyes wandering a lot, but she also noticed his gaze usually ended up on Gwen. Ben didn't realize what he was doing though, so the knowing smiles Lucy kept giving him when Gwen's back was turned just seemed cryptic to him. After getting bored of walking around the party talking to friends and relatives, the three of them made their way back to the room they were in before. When they got there, Gwen excused herself to go to the bathroom, which Lucy directed her to. Ben was left alone with Lucy again. As soon as Gwen left, Lucy turned to him with a smile on her face. Doesn't Gwen look gorgeous tonight? She asked him. Ben was taken aback. Lucy must have known that was an awkward question to ask about someone's cousin. Lucy laughed. I suppose that's a ridiculous thing to say. She always looks gorgeous, doesn't she? Lucy stared into Ben's eyes. She looked like she was expecting Ben to say something in particular, but he wasn't sure what that might be. That's. Ben stuttered. Lucy rolled her eyes. She gave him another knowing smile. Ben thought it seemed like she knew something he didn't. He looked at her questioningly, but she didn't explain herself. A few moments later, Gwen came back into the room. "Yippee!" Lucy said. "Gwen's back." "Huh. I was only gone for a minute." "Still too long," Lucy insisted. "So, what do you wanna do now?" "You pick." "Home." "Well, okay." Gwen smiled. She seemed relieved to get her turn to set the pace rather than trying to keep up with Lucy the whole time. "Got any board games?" Ben, Gwen, and Lucy spent the rest of the night hanging out. They talked, speculated on what they'd be getting for Christmas tomorrow morning, played board games, and ate way too much for dessert. Lucy even snuck some more eggnog. Gwen suspected the alcohol was having an effect on her, but it was hard to tell with Lucy. As the night began to wind down, Ben and Gwen's parents came to find them. They'd be taking separate cars home, but they'd be driving back to Bellwood at the same time. Before they went out the door, Lucy pulled Gwen in for a hug. Ben watched Lucy lean in and whisper something into Gwen's ear. He couldn't hear what she said, but Gwen looked very confused. Lucy turned to hug him next. She whispered in his ear, "Make the right choice, okay?" Ben wondered what she meant by that, but he didn't get a chance to ask. "What choice?" January, Year 3. "Hey, Ben," Julie greeted him as he walked by her on the first day back from Christmas break. "Hey." Ben returned the greeting before taking his seat. "Well, guess I lose again." For the last couple of days, Ben had been simultaneously looking forward to and dreading seeing Julie again. He'd decided he wanted to try actually talking to her beyond just saying hello or talking about nothing. Now that he was back in school and he had the opportunity to go through with it, he was once again unable to. Ben's problem with talking to Julie was always that he didn't have anything to talk about. "How come the coolest thing in my life is the one thing I can't tell anyone about?" Ben stared at the Omnitrix on his wrist. Aside from the watch, he felt like he didn't have much else going for him. He hated that thought, but he couldn't help it from creeping into his mind. "If I could just show her what I can do." Ben put his hand over the Omnitrix, then moved it underneath his desk. As tempting as it was to show it off, he knew it would be better if less people knew about it. So with nothing else to talk about, he was never prepared to deal with Julie. But whether Ben was prepared or not, he got his next chance to talk with her that day at lunch. He was sitting alone at his lunch table, which wasn't unusual for him, so he didn't care. His mind was preoccupied, but he snapped out of it when Julie appeared on the other side of the table. "Mind if I sit here?" Julie asked. Sure." Ben tried to remain confident. He reminded himself that she wasn't scary at all, but it didn't help much. Julie set her lunch tray down and took a seat across from Ben. As she began to eat, Ben was impressed by how much food she had on her tray. "She's almost as big an eater as me." He tried to figure out why she was here. They sometimes talked in the cafeteria if they were next to each other in the lunch line or something, but they'd never sat together before. Maybe none of her friends are here today. However, when he looked around the room, he saw a few of her friends sitting together at a table on the far side of the cafeteria. "What? So, how was your break?" Julie asked. "It wasn't bad, I guess." "How was yours?" Julie shrugged. "It was nice, but I didn't do anything real vacation. Why? I still had tennis practice and all my other normal activities. At least we didn't have school, though." Ben chuckled in agreement to that. "You do anything fun?" she asked. I didn't do any real vacation stuff either. I just hung out with my cousin a lot, Ben said. On Christmas Eve, we went to our other cousin's house, 'cause they were hosting our family's Christmas party this time. Oh yeah, I think you've mentioned your cousin before, right? Julie said. Ben didn't realize he had. Who's the other cousin? Julie asked. Well, she not actually my cousin, exactly, Ben explained. She's my dad's cousin's wife's cousin. But my dad's cousin and his wife adopted her. So, yeah. Julie had an amused look on her face. You've got an interesting family. You have no idea. Ben laughed inwardly. The first cousin I mentioned is just my dad's brother's daughter. Julie nodded. I have a few cousins that I got to see over break, too, she said. Where's she from? My cousin. She lives in Bellwood, she just goes to the other school. Oh, cool. So that's why you hang out with her so much, Julie said. What grade is she in? 7th. She's my age. Ben wasn't sure why, but he kept talking. Exactly my age, actually. We have the same birthday. Oh wow, that's quite a coincidence, Julie said. You're like twins. Ben laughed at that. You're lucky you've got a cousin your age who lives nearby, she continued. All my cousins live in other states or back in Japan, and most of them are much older than me. Kinda makes family gatherings a little lame. Yeah, I know what you mean, Ben said. At the Christmas party, me and my cousins were the only kids there. That's always annoying, Julie agreed. At most of my family's get-togethers, the only kids there end up being me, one of my cousins who's 2 years younger than me, and another one who's 3 years older. Other than that, it's all adults, old people, and babies. Ben was surprised by how the conversation was going. He was a lot less terse and stuttery than he usually was when he talked to her. He liked it. You don't have any siblings, then? Julie asked. Ben shook his head. Yeah, me neither. Neither does Gwen, Ben said. Julie looked at him questioningly. My cousin, he clarified, realizing he hadn't told her Gwen's name yet. Julie nodded in recognition. Ben smiled fondly as he remembered something. Once, when we were younger, she tricked me into thinking she had a brother. What? How'd she do that? Julie laughed. We were like 6 or 7 years old, and I was at her house, Ben began. One of her neighbors came by to borrow something from her parents. I asked who he was, and she decided to mess with me, because I guess I was kinda gullible back then. So she told me it was her older brother Ken. And I was like, well, I'm Ben, she's Gwen, he's Ken, makes sense to me. Ben and Julie both laughed at that. She called me doofus so much after that. Kid logic is hilarious, Julie said. My uncle used to make up stuff like that to trick me all the time. Like once, when I was 5, my family watched a lunar eclipse together. My uncle held up an apple and pretended that he'd taken the moon out of the sky, then he threw it. And I was like, don't throw the moon, you might break it. After they had a good laugh about that, Ben and Julie continued swapping stories about their families. Before Ben knew it, lunch period was over, and it was time to go back to class. As they left the cafeteria and went their separate ways, Julie gave Ben a quick wave goodbye. See you later, Ben, she said simply. Ben returned her wave as he left. It came as a surprise to Ben that time had passed so quickly. He figured they still had at least 10 minutes left. He wanted to talk with Julie some more. That's when he realized he'd actually managed to have a conversation with her, and it had lasted the entire lunch period. He walked the rest of the way to his next class with a big grin on his face, feeling accomplished. Ben's good mood didn't die down for the rest of the day. He was still smiling broadly and walking with confidence as he went to meet Gwen at the park. When she spotted him, she gave him a curious look. "Hiya, Gwen." Ben greeted her. "How you doing today?" Gwen looked a little surprised at Ben's enthusiastic greeting, but she also seemed happy about it. "Great," she said, returning his smile. "How are you?" "Oh, I'm as awesome as ever," Ben declared. "Now, come on. Let's go to my house." "Okay," Gwen agreed, following after Ben, who was already marching home. "So, what'd you do today?" Ben asked as they walked home. "Oh, not a whole lot. Actually, I broke up a fight between two kids in the hall today." "Seriously?" "Yeah. I pulled them off each other, got between them, and started yelling at them the way I'd seen teachers do it. And it worked. They got really scared and started apologizing. Poor kids. They had no idea they had someone worse than the teachers to worry about," Ben joked. "Shut up." Gwen laughed, playfully punching him in the shoulder. Gwen went on to tell Ben all about her first day back from break. As she spoke, Ben gave her his full attention, laughing when she said something funny and cutting in with his own comments about everything. Discussing their day was nothing new. They did it practically every day when they hung out after school. But Gwen noticed Ben was definitely taking more of an interest than usual. He's in a very good mood for some reason. By the time they got to Ben's house, Ben's good mood had spread to Gwen as well. For an hour, they battled each other in one of the new games Ben had gotten for Christmas. They really got into it, especially with the playful smack talk they tossed back and forth as they competed. "Oh!" Ben moaned as the victory screen declared Gwen's character the winner. "Well played. I don't know how you pulled that off, but that was wicked cool." Gwen chuckled a little at how much he was complimenting her. "What is up with you today?" she asked. "I don't know what you mean," Ben answered with a playful grin. "No, seriously. You've been acting like such a dork all day, you've gotta be in a good mood about something." "I wanna know what's going on," Gwen said. Ben looked at her, but said nothing. He seemed really excited, like he was holding something back and just couldn't come out and say it. Gwen was really curious now. "Oh, come on. Tell me. Please." Gwen gave him an exaggerated pouty face. Okay, geez," Ben relented. "Okay, I know this might sound stupid, but I talked to Julie." "What?" Gwen faltered a bit. "Is that it? I mean, good job." She gave him a thumbs up and a vague smile. Ben seemed rather proud of himself. "But, weren't you already talking to her?" Gwen asked, remembering things Ben had told her before about his situation with Julie. "Yeah, but this was different," Ben insisted. "This time I really talked to her. Like, for the whole lunch block. And it wasn't awkward at all." "Oh. Okay," Gwen said. "And the best part is, she sat with me." Ben went on. "Like, I'm just sitting there, and she comes up and sits down right across from me. It was awesome." Ben still seemed very excited. Gwen only nodded in acknowledgement of what he was saying. "Well, I guess he wants to savor the small victories." "You think she likes me?" Ben asked. "She's gotta like me, right?" Even without knowing about the Omnitrix, I'm sure she's noticed how great I am. Why else would she sit with me instead of her friends? All right, that's a bit much. Ben was acting a little full of himself now, and it was starting to get on Gwen's nerves. But for some reason, she didn't feel like calling him out on it. She just stared vaguely in his direction with an unamused look on her face as he continued to praise himself. He didn't seem to notice. I learned so much about her today. Did you know her dad's from Japan? And her mom's parents are too. Ben kept talking. I told her about our family, too. Just the non-alien parts, I mean. She was so interested in me. I mean, of course she would be, right? Gwen was a little surprised by all of this. Ben had always been confident, but she hadn't seen him act like this since their first summer together. He'd matured so much since then, so it was a little jarring to see a bit of his old arrogance slipping out. He talks to a girl once and suddenly he's king of the world. I think I'm gonna ask her out, Ben declared. Gwen snapped back to attention. Huh? Like, on a date? Or to be her boyfriend, or whatever, Ben said. I don't really know how it works. But I wanna go out with her. And I think she wants to go out with me, too. Gwen suddenly felt very uncomfortable. She wasn't exactly sure why, but she didn't want to hear any more about his cousin's supposed love life. She stood up. I think I'm gonna get going, she said. What? Ben turned to look at her. Oh, really? You just got here? I know, but I've kinda got a lot of homework to do today. That wasn't exactly a lie, although she didn't have much more homework than she usually did. Oh. Okay, Ben said. So, see you tomorrow. Yeah, Gwen said. She grabbed her backpack and walked away, heading for the door. Stupid Ben. Gwen used to say those words in her head quite often. It amazed her that, after all this time, he still managed to get on her nerves somehow. Sitting at her desk, unable to focus on her homework, she put her face in her hands and groaned. Doesn't he know how obnoxious it is to go on and on about your crush like that? Gwen couldn't get the idea out of her head. Earlier, she'd actually been rooting for him. If talking to this girl he was crushing on made him happy, then that was what she wanted for him. She was even a little bit proud of him for conquering his fear and going through with it, even if she still thought it was dumb of him to be afraid in the first place. But now, after he'd actually done it, things had turned out differently than she'd expected. He just gets so arrogant. That was the problem, Gwen decided. That's why Ben had been so annoying to her. They were teenagers now, but he was still acting like a little kid. If he's that full of himself after just talking to a girl, how stuck up is he gonna get if he actually gets a girlfriend? She'd seen him like this before, back during their first summer together. He got one look at Kai, and suddenly he was pretending to be interested in Native American spiritual dance. Gwen hadn't liked Kai from the minute she'd seen her, and yet Ben was constantly bragging to her about being some big superhero and going out of his way to try to impress her. It was sickening. This Julie girl seemed like she was having the exact same effect on Ben. Gwen took a deep breath and stood up. She paced around her room a little. I don't care. I don't care. She hated that he made her feel this way. It felt like when they were younger and they'd constantly do battle by annoying each other. Only this time, Ben was winning without even trying. And she definitely hated losing to Ben. Gwen collapsed onto her bed and groaned again. Anyway, there's no need to worry. He'll ask her out, she'll turn him down, and his head will deflate back to normal. End of story. In her mind, that was the most likely way for the situation to play out. However, she felt guilty for thinking it, and feeling guilty only made her feel like she was losing to Ben even more. No. I'm not the bad guy here. She once again cursed Ben's ability to get into her head without even trying. Feeling thoroughly defeated, Gwen rolled out of bed and went back to her desk. Doofus. Gwen was a little nervous about meeting Ben the next day. The day before had begun so well, but it had ended terribly. Moreover, she hadn't even told Ben that he'd annoyed her. Is that against the agreement we made? Now she had a choice to make. She could continue to act like nothing was wrong and hope that today wouldn't be a repeat of the previous day. Alternatively, she could be upfront with him about it like she normally was, but that would risk making things awkward or turning the situation into an actual fight. Gwen couldn't figure out why she was acting like this. When have I ever not called him out on being obnoxious? If this were any other situation, she would have gotten right in his face as soon as he'd started bothering her yesterday. But something about this situation was off. The whole thing made her uncomfortable. Rather than fight about it, she just wanted it all to go away. That stupid girl. She immediately chided herself for thinking that way. It's not really her fault. Gwen still hadn't met Julie, so she didn't think she could really have an opinion of her. If Julie were anything like Kai, Gwen knew she wouldn't like her. But for all she knew, Julie could actually be a nice person. She was so busy contemplating all of this, she didn't even notice when Ben arrived. Ow! Gwen said in surprise as Ben flicked her head with his finger. Hey, dweeb, he greeted her. What the heck was that for? Gwen asked, a little irritably. Getting your attention, Ben said, like it was nothing. By flicking me? Gwen asked, glaring at him. It worked, didn't it? Ben gave her a playful smile. Gwen held up her hand and flicked Ben in the forehead. Ow! He stumbled back, placing a hand on his forehead. Then he shrugged. Fair enough. Fair enough. Gwen repeated. Why would you? Gwen stepped forward, ready to hit him again, but she stopped herself. She was getting mad, but Ben was still smiling like they were play fighting. Shit. She realized she might have been overreacting. She let out an annoyed sigh as she tried to calm herself. Okay, she said. Fair enough. Great, Ben said. Arcade. Gwen wasn't sure why he was suggesting they go to the arcade again, but she agreed. All right. On their way there, Gwen looked Ben up and down. He seemed to be in a decent mood, but nowhere near the level of excitement he was at yesterday. Maybe he tried talking to her again. Gwen got the feeling he had, and it hadn't gone as well as he'd hoped. Or, maybe he was going to, but he chickened out. Gwen couldn't help but be curious. Part of her wanted to ask what had happened. Another part of her wanted nothing to do with the situation. And yet another part of her was concerned for her cousin. She suddenly found herself very nervous. She couldn't decide whether or not to say anything, so she just walked beside Ben silently. She glanced at him out of the corner of her eye and saw he was walking with his hand on his chest, like he was holding something against himself. Then she realized what he was doing. The locket. Gwen was surprised. He's actually wearing it. She copied what Ben was doing, lifting her hand and placing it against her chest. She felt her own birthday gift, the replica charm of bezel she'd received from him. Like Ben, She wore it as a necklace, hidden beneath her shirt. She smiled to herself as she clutched it, and she didn't feel quite as nervous anymore. Gwen was right. Ben had planned on talking to Julie again that day, but he hadn't been able to go through with it. He failed to do it in the morning, so he told himself he'd talk to her again at some point before school let out. But when he saw her at lunch, he bailed at the last second and went to sit on the other side of the cafeteria. Ben was really annoyed with himself. He thought it would be easier to talk to Julie now that they'd had a decent conversation, but now it seemed like there was a lot of pressure on him. If he tried talking to her again and it didn't turn out as well as it had before, then that might mean the first time had been a fluke and he'd never truly get any closer to her. That's why it was simultaneously relieving and panic-inducing when Julie sat down at Ben's lunch table again the day after. "Hey, Ben," she greeted him as she sat down, her voice the usual level of friendly and casual. "Oh. Hey, Julie." Ben continued eating his lunch. "Been up to anything today?" Julie asked him. School." Ben answered, since that was the only place he'd been all day aside from his house. Julie laughed. "I guess that's true. What about yesterday then?" "After school, that is. I just hung out with my cousin." "We went to the arcade," Ben answered. "Oh, which one?" Julie asked. "The one near the park." "Ah, nice," Julie said. "I've been there before, a long time ago." "Do they still have that game with the plastic gun you point at the screen and the foot pedal you have to step on to take cover?" "Yeah," Ben said, smiling at the memory of playing it just yesterday. "Me and my cousin did the two-player mode. We got really far, but we died a few times to this one boss and decided to stop letting it eat our quarters." Julie laughed. "Yeah, those things are always too expensive." "Fun, though." Ben and Julie spent the next couple minutes discussing the games at the arcade. They liked some of the same games, and they had differing opinions on others. Their conversation shifted when Julie noticed something. "What is that thing, anyway?" she asked. Ben saw she was looking at the Omnitrix, which he hadn't realized he'd been fiddling with. "I've never seen you without it. Is it just a big watch?" Ben was caught off guard. Part of not being very social meant he hadn't had to deal with many people asking him about the Omnitrix. He still hadn't worked out the best way to explain it to someone when he couldn't tell the truth. "Oh. Well, yeah, it's a watch," Ben lied. "It's been broken for a while, but I keep wearing it 'cause it looks cool." Julie found that amusing. "Well, it definitely looks very sci-fi." Ben laughed nervously and put his left arm under the table. "So, anyway, what day next week is our math test again?" he asked, trying to shift the conversation to something else to draw her attention away from the Omnitrix. Ben suddenly had a weird thought. Could she be pretending to be interested in me just to get to the Omnitrix? He wondered if she might be some kind of robot alien replicant sent by one of his enemies to steal it from him. Then he watched her take a big, hungry bite out of her hamburger. Well, she's not a Terminator. Mentally, Ben laughed off his idea. He did so partly because he wanted to believe she really liked him, and partly because, if she were some sort of robot, she probably would have already attacked him months ago. At the end of lunch, Ben and Julie went their separate ways. Once again, Ben felt a sense of accomplishment. Even after getting asked about the Omnitrix, he'd somehow managed to keep up another decent conversation with her. Maybe this won't be so hard after all. February, Year 3. Over the course of the previous month, Ben and Julie began spending more and more time with each other at school. They talked a lot in homeroom and in the classes they shared. They sat together at lunch most days, and Julie even introduced Ben to some of her other friends. She had basically become the first real friend he'd had at school for a very long time. For the most part, Gwen remained unaware of these developments, despite her and Ben still hanging out regularly. Every now and then, Ben would mention Julie and her friends when they were telling each other about their days, but Gwen hadn't realized there was now someone other than herself and Lucy that Ben might call his friend. However, Gwen certainly realized that Ben's mood had improved. Nowadays, he seemed happy every time she saw him. It usually wasn't anything drastic, but he was generally in a good mood, even during times when she'd normally expect him to be bored. Since Gwen sort of knew why, this change was a little weird for her, but she liked it. Whether or not she was aware of it, seeing her cousin like that made her feel good as well, and they always had a good time together. Gwen had long since forgotten the time Ben's arrogance had really gotten on her nerve last month. In the end, she'd decided it wasn't worth confronting Ben about it. So, she unspokenly forgave him, and there hadn't been another incident like it since. One day in mid-February, Ben and Gwen ended up at a Mr. Smoothie after Gwen's karate class had finished. It wasn't something they always did, but for more than a year at this point, it had been somewhat of a tradition. Gwen was telling Ben the story of her latest sparring match. "I got matched up against David again," she said. "He's probably the best fighter in the class. I don't know why our instructor always pairs me up with him." "Did you win?" Ben asked. "Well, yeah, but it was really close. And I got really lucky when David let his guard down when I happened to be in the right spot." "Yeah, sure." Gwen sounded sincere, but Ben could tell she was being modest. The idea that anyone in her karate class was a better fighter than her was laughable to him. Not that she needs to know that. "Oh, darn. I was hoping to hear you got destroyed," Ben said with a smirk. Gwen gave him a playful punch on the shoulder. The conversation stopped for a moment. Ben looked off into space while he sipped his smoothie. There was something he'd been thinking about a lot lately. He was planning to ask Julie out, and he was trying to come up with ideas about what to do for their first date. He'd never been on a date before, so all he knew about it was what he'd seen on TV and in movies. As he looked around the room and wondered if Mr. Smoothie was the kind of place anyone would ever bring a date, he made eye contact with Gwen. "Not that this is a date." Gwen looked like she could tell there was something on his mind, but she didn't press him on it. "I've been researching how to recreate the charms of Basil," she said. "What? Wait, really? That's awesome," Ben said encouragingly. He'd been wondering whether that was actually possible or not. He was glad it was, since that meant his birthday gift to her was a whole lot cooler. Gwen smiled as she lifted her necklace out from under her shirt. "It's made of the right material. The markings on it are very close to the charm of telekinesis, but they're a bit off. I'll have to alter them." "That's all you need to do?" Ben asked. Gwen shook her head. "There's a lot more to it. Incantations, a ritual circle, the right time of day. But I think I can do it. I might need your help, though." "Me?" Ben looked confused. "I'm not magic. And neither are any of my aliens." "I know," Gwen said. "But some of these rituals might be easier with an acolyte." Ben looked skeptical. "You're not gonna sacrifice me to some unholy elder god or something, are you?" Only if you annoy me too much. No such thing as annoying you too much. Gwen laughed. So, what do you think? Will you help me? Ben took a big sip of his smoothie. Okay, he said. But no pointy hats. Before his next class, Ben found himself hopelessly searching through the mess in his locker. He knew he had his homework in there somewhere, buried beneath all the junk. But he just couldn't find it, and it was getting frustrating. My teacher will never believe I did it. He heard a voice from behind him. Hey, Ben. He turned around and saw Julie, standing there casually with her hands in the pockets of her pink hoodie. Oh. Hey, Julie. Are you doing anything after school today? She asked him. Ben suddenly got nervous. She didn't sound like she was simply curious. She sounded more like she was about to invite him to do something with her if he said he was free. What does this mean? Julie looked at him expectantly, but seemed a little confused. Ben realized he still hadn't answered. No, I got nothing planned, he decided to say. Great, Julie said. Do you play tennis at all? Ben furrowed his brow. No. He used to play baseball, but he was never very good at sports of any kind. Not as a human, anyway. Why? He asked. Well, I usually practice with Ally, but she's sick today, Julie explained. So you've never played tennis? No, never, Ben said. He saw an opportunity. But I wouldn't mind learning how. Julie thought for a second, then she smiled. Okay. You want me to teach you? Ben realized teaching him wouldn't be very useful as practice for her, but it was better than not playing at all. She seemed to think it sounded fun anyway. Sure. Ben agreed excitedly. Cool, Julie said. We can meet up at the end of the day and I'll show you to the court. Do you have gym clothes? Yeah, Ben said, turning to his overflowing locker. His pay clothes had been in there for a while. Somewhere in there. But yeah, after school. Sounds good. Julie smiled again. Great. See you later. Ben stood there for a moment, watching her as she left. What just happened? He eventually managed to process that he was going to hang out with Julie, outside of school. In his mind, that was already halfway to a date. He stood in a triumphant victory pose. Ben Tennyson does it again. Ben darted back to the right side of the court. At the last second, he managed to swat the tennis ball back over the net. On the other side, Julie quickly moved into position and lightly hit it, returning it to the left side of Ben's half of the court. He made an effort to reach it in time, but he couldn't. See? You're getting it, Julie encouraged him. Ben looked up at her and nodded, then went to retrieve the ball. Sure doesn't feel like I'm getting it. Earlier, when they'd started, Julie had given him a quick rundown of the basics and shown him how to hold and swing the racket forehand and backhand. Now she was teaching him how to return a serve. At first, he was lucky to get 2 hits in during a volley, but now he was able to get 3 or 4. It was an improvement, but not enough for Ben. As he walked towards where the ball had landed, Ben heard a buzzing sound. He looked towards the source of the noise. It was coming from his backpack over on the bench. Hang on a sec, Ben called to Julie. He ran to his bag and pulled out his phone. Looking at the caller ID, it said Dweeb. Gwen. He answered it. Hello. Ben. Came Gwen's voice from the other end of the phone. What's going on? I've been texting you. Ben looked at his phone again and saw he had 4 new messages. Oh, crap. I forgot to tell her. At this point, Ben and Gwen knew each other's schedules pretty well. They always met up after school on days like this. Oh, yeah. Sorry, Ben said, sounding guilty. Something came up, so I can't hang out today. And you didn't think to tell me that. Gwen sounded mad now. I've been waiting here for 45 minutes. I tried texting you and you didn't answer. I was freaking out 'cause I thought you'd been attacked by aliens or something. Yeah, I'm really sorry, Ben apologized again. But I'm all right. Nothing alien related, Ben said quietly so Julie wouldn't hear. What are you even doing? Gwen asked. I'm playing tennis. Tennis? Did you join a club team or something? No, Ben said. He looked over at Julie, who was getting a drink of water. I'm just hanging out with Julie, he explained, smiling a little proudly to himself. There was no answer for a moment. Gwen. You there? Ben asked. Gwen groaned. Whatever. She hung up. Ben still felt guilty, but he put his phone back in his bag and rejoined Julie on the court. Everything all right? Julie asked. Yeah. It was just my cousin wondering where I was. Oh, did you already have plans with her? Home? No, she was just seeing if I was free. Ben held up the tennis ball, ready to toss it back to her so she could serve it again. So, you wanna try serving this time? Julie asked, getting back to tennis. You've been watching how I do it, right? Yeah. Sort of, Ben affirmed. He held his hand out, ready to toss the ball up now. Move back a little, behind the baseline, Julie instructed him. Oh, right. Ben moved back. He tossed the ball up into the air, swung at it, and missed. Crud. The ball hit the ground and he caught it on the first bounce. Julie laughed good-naturedly. Ben forced a smile. Bet that made me look like an idiot. He tried again. This time, he hit it. The ball went over the net like it should. Julie ran up and hit it back. Ben tried to return it, but he missed. That was good, Julie said. But if you're starting on that side, it's gotta land in this service box. Julie pointed with her racket at the box on the opposite side of the court. Oh. Okay. Ben went to retrieve the ball and try again. Ben and Julie kept playing for about another hour. Julie continued to explain the game and give him pointers. Eventually, Ben got good enough for the two of them to get a few good volleys in. Ben actually started to find it fun by the end, and Julie seemed genuinely impressed with him. I need to get home in time for dinner, Julie eventually told Ben, stopping the game. Yeah, I should probably get home, too. You did really well for a total beginner, Julie complimented him as they grabbed their stuff from the bench. Thanks. Ben said happily. Julie stood there smiling at him for a moment. She seemed to be expecting something. Well, see you later, Ben, she said, turning to walk away. Wait. Ben called out. Home. Julie stopped walking and turned to face him again. Maybe Julie's compliments had given him a confidence boost, or maybe he'd figured this was the best opportunity he'd have for a while, but Ben impulsively decided that now was the time to do this. Here goes nothing. I was wondering. Do you wanna, get together sometime? Ben was expecting her to point out that they technically got together just now already, but she seemed to know what he meant. He was asking her out. Sure, she smiled. When? Ben didn't have an answer prepared for that. In fact, he didn't have anything prepared. He'd imagined this moment a few dozen times, but he didn't think he'd actually get this far. Tomorrow night. We could go to a movie, Ben suggested. It wasn't at all original, but he couldn't come up with anything better on the spot. Julie thought for a second, then frowned. I can't do tomorrow night. Ben's heart sunk. He wondered if this was her way of politely turning him down after all. But then she continued. How about Sunday? Julie suggested. Sure. Ben agreed enthusiastically. He wondered if Julie's parents would even let her go out when there would be school the next day, but he didn't want to worry about that. Great, Julie said. Call me Sunday afternoon and we'll pick out a movie. Okay, Ben agreed. Julie smiled at him again. Well, bye for now, then. Cool. See ya, Ben said as they parted ways. He hoped he sounded casual, because fireworks were going off in his head. He couldn't believe how well that had gone. He started walking home, but then he looked at his phone. He remembered his phone call from Gwen earlier and felt guilty again. Maybe I should go see her. He changed direction and headed for Gwen's house. Ben questioned his decision once he arrived at Gwen's front door. It was 6 o'clock, so she could be busy eating dinner. What do I do if her mom answers the door? He considered going home and just calling her, or going around back and throwing a rock at her window. That usually worked, although it always pissed her off. Ben shook his head. He'd already taken the time to walk here, so he decided not to make that a waste of his time. Reaching forward, he rang the doorbell. After waiting for a moment, he was about to try ringing the bell again, but the door opened. Gwen stood before him. At first, she looked surprised to see him. Then her eyes narrowed into a tired glare, but she said nothing. Hey, Gwen, Ben greeted her, giving her a nervous smile. What do you want, doofus? Gwen asked, not making an attempt to be friendly. It was clear she was still mad, so Ben continued. I wanted to apologize. I guess I kinda screwed up today with the whole not telling you I had plans thing. I was gonna, I just forgot. You know how stupid I felt? Gwen asked. Just standing around in the park, waiting for you for that long. Gwen wasn't shouting, but her voicing was layered with bitterness. And that's to say nothing of what I was imagining could have happened. Vilgax. Kevin. Some random alien we beat up last summer. Who knows? All because you were too spacey to pick up your damn phone and send me a simple text. Hey, chill out. Ben didn't like being told off like that, especially by Gwen, and especially when she was overreacting like this. Nothing happened to me, all right? No bad guys, no aliens, no nothing. I was just hanging out with a friend. Gwen's gaze got scarier. Look, I'm sorry, all right. Ben apologized again, hoping it would be enough to appease her. Good, Gwen said. You should be. She slammed the door in his face. Ben stood on the front step for a moment. What a fucking drama queen. He couldn't believe she was this upset. He knew he'd messed up, but she seemed way angrier about this than she should be. Ben turned around to head home, but after taking a few steps, he heard Gwen's door open again behind him. He stopped and looked over his shoulder. Gwen poked her head outside. She was hanging her head a little, so it was hard for Ben to read her expression. We're doing something tomorrow instead, she told him. Ben was surprised. He was expecting her to yell at him one last time. Okay. Gwen nodded. She disappeared from sight and closed the door. Well. Everything went better than expected. The next day was Saturday, so Gwen slept in. When she woke up, the first thing she did was check her phone. She wasn't completely awake yet, so it took her a moment to figure out why she did so. Then she remembered yesterday's conversation with Ben. Guess he hasn't called yet. Ben liked to sleep in more than she did, so he probably wasn't even awake yet. She considered that a relief. She wouldn't want to miss a call from him if he'd be trying to make plans for the day. But then again, maybe he'll forget to call this time too. Gwen couldn't help being a little bitter about yesterday still. But then she remembered how apologetic he'd been about it. Maybe I was too hard on him. After chewing him out like that, Gwen wouldn't be surprised if Ben was the one who was mad now. She began wondering if the reason she had no messages from Ben wasn't because he was still asleep, but because he didn't actually want to see her today. Please don't tell me I started another fight. The two of them hadn't had a real fight in quite a while, by their standards. She'd been trying to avoid anything like that, and she could tell Ben had been as well. That was a phase in their friendship she was hoping they were long past. Maybe I should call and apologize. But it was his fault. But I didn't need to. Gwen's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of her phone buzzing. She froze. While she was fighting herself in her head, she'd been moving around her room going about her morning routine, so her phone was on the other side of the room now. But as soon as it buzzed a second time, she darted back over to her nightstand to grab it. "Hey," Gwen said, answering the call. She tried to sound like she wasn't in a mild panic. "Hey, Gwen," Ben said. "You still good to hang out today?" he asked, getting straight to the point. "Phew. Gwen took a moment to process everything before answering. "Sure. What do you wanna do?" "I don't know," Ben said. "We could work on that charm of Bizzle thing if you want," he suggested. "No," Gwen said, shaking her head to herself. "The next ritual needs to be done during a certain phase of the moon. Today won't work." "Oh," Ben said. "Man, your magic stuff sounds so much weirder than my alien stuff." Gwen laughed. "You wanna come over anyway, though? There's plenty we could do that doesn't rely on the lunar calendar." "Sure thing, Hermione," Ben agreed. "So, he went on, stumbling over his words a bit. "Are you still mad about yesterday at all?" he asked. Why did he have to bring it up? Gwen gave a long, drawn-out, clearly irritated sigh. "Just be honest." "Well, yes, I am. A little," she said. "But I know you said you're sorry already, and I believe you. So just try to remember to tell me next time you can't hang out. That's all." "I will," Ben said. Sorry, he apologized for what felt like the 1000th time. "I know. So you're coming?" Gwen quickly changed the subject back to their immediate plans, hoping to end the discussion there so they didn't have to keep talking about yesterday. "Yeah, just gotta ask my parents, but they'll say yes." "You gonna get a ride from them?" Gwen asked, trying to gauge how long it would be until he got there since she still needed a bit more time to get ready. "Nah, I'll just go XLR8," Ben said. "Really?" Gwen was usually against him using his aliens for mundane things. She considered it an unnecessary risk. "Relax, it'll take 2 seconds," Ben reasoned. "See you in a bit." "But Ben," Gwen was cut off as Ben hung up. She wondered if he had been kidding, but a few minutes later, her doorbell rang. Ben couldn't possibly have walked, or even driven, from his house to hers in that amount of time. Doofus. Gwen ran out of her room and went to the front door. It was bad enough for him to be running around as an alien outside in broad daylight, but in that short amount of time, the Omnitrix couldn't have timed out yet either. What would Mom and Dad think if a skinny blue alien dinosaur thing showed up at our house? But when she opened the front door, there was only Ben standing there, a smug smile adorning his face. How did you? Gwen was confused, then angry. Get in here. She grabbed him by his shirt collar and pulled him into the house. Whoa, hey. Relax, Ben protested as Gwen dragged him upstairs into her room. Once inside, she slammed the door behind them. Just what the hell do you think you're doing? Gwen scolded him. You really went XLR8 in the middle of the day like this? Hey, chill, dweeb. Ben held up his hands. Nobody saw me. I move so fast, nobody can see me, he insisted. Gwen rolled her eyes and sighed. How did you change back so fast? Gwen asked. The Omnitrix usually takes longer than that to time out. Ben held up the Omnitrix and started turning the dial. Oh, I've been practicing, he said. I'm really getting the hang of this thing. Oh. Gwen looked at him funny, then spoke. I guess it's good you're learning how to use it more effectively, but try to avoid using in public, especially in broad freaking daylight, okay? No, Ben refused, giving her a cocky smile that he knew would bother her. So, what are we doing today? Gwen face-palmed. What am I gonna do with you, doofus? Despite the somewhat rocky start, Ben and Gwen ended up getting along better as the day went on. They spent all day hanging out at Gwen's house playing video games, watching TV, and sparring in the backyard. Ben even stayed for dinner with Gwen and her parents. By then, the fighting they'd done the day before was completely forgotten. After dinner, they managed to convince Gwen's parents to let Ben stay for a little longer, so they decided to squeeze in a few more matches of sumo slammers. Like always, they got pretty serious with their competition. The score for the day was 7-7, but they wanted to end the day with a clear winner. Gwen's father called from the other room. We should really be getting Ben home soon. Okay, Dad. Gwen called back without turning her head. The match was close, with both her and Ben's characters almost out of health. She didn't want to divert her attention too much if she could avoid it. Just give us a minute. For the next few moments, the only sounds in the room came from the TV and from the mashing of buttons on their controllers. Both trying their hardest to win, neither willing to lose to the other. At the same time, they both moved in for their killing move. They shouted and stood up as their characters jumped and collided in the air. Their characters, in perfect synchronicity, were knocked back and fell to the ground. Neither got up. In big red letters, the word draw came up on screen. Ah! Ben and Gwen moaned in frustration as they both fell back onto the couch. I totally had that one, Ben complained. In your dreams, Gwen argued. My character's faster. I so should have had that one. Ben sighed, then looked towards the doorway. Guess I gotta get going, huh? Gwen nodded. She hated leaving their little competition in a tie, but she didn't think she should push her luck with her parents any further. She figured they'd have to settle it tomorrow. She also remembered something else. Hey, you know how I said the ritual we need to do with the charm of Bizzle has to be done during a certain lunar phase? Yeah, Ben nodded. Well, tomorrow night, the moon should be in the right phase, Gwen said. You wanna come back tomorrow? We can do some tiebreaker games while we wait until it's dark enough. Ben made a face like he had some bad news. Well, I'm kinda busy tomorrow night. Gwen tilted her head. Busy with what? She guessed he had a school project due on Monday that he hadn't even started yet. Well, me and Julie have Ben hesitated. As soon as he mentioned Julie, he got nervous, and Gwen found herself inexplicably annoyed. Date, Ben finished. Gwen's eyes went wide with surprise. A date? She asked, confused. Ben nodded. Like a date. Gwen asked for clarification. Ben nodded again. Oh. Gwen was disappointed, and suddenly the situation felt incredibly awkward. Then she remembered the charm of Bizzle. But the ritual? She said. I'm still not sure how many lunar positions will work for it. If we don't do it tomorrow, it could be another month before our next chance. Ben shrugged and gave her an apologetic look. Sorry, he said. But I can't back out of this. This could be my only chance with her. He insisted. Gwen sighed and lowered her head. Ben could see just how disappointed she was. But don't worry, Ben said. It's just one day. We can hang out any other time. Gwen looked up at Ben. She wanted to say something, but her father called for them again. Coming, Dad. She called back. Come on, let's go. Gwen knelt on the floor of her room. She'd moved a lot of her stuff off to the sides and pushed the rug away to reveal a large space on the floor. There, using chalk, she'd drawn a circle adorned with many intricate patterns. Gwen was situated in a smaller circle on the edge of the larger one. Carefully, she removed her necklace and held it in front of her. Muttering words in a strange language, she leaned forward and delicately placed the stone in the center of the circle. Leaning back, Gwen looked across to the other side of the circle, where another smaller circle identical to hers sat empty. She sighed. He wouldn't have been much help anyway. She looked across the room at her bedside clock, then out her window. Ben and Julie were probably in the middle of their movie right about now. Gwen didn't actually know the specifics of their plans, but she figured Ben wouldn't have come up with anything more original than that. Without meaning to, she pictured Ben sitting in the theater. She didn't know what Julie looked like, so all she could imagine was someone like Nicole, the girl in her grade whom she couldn't stand. She didn't like the picture in her head of the two of them together, holding hands as they watched the movie, turning to face each other, slowly moving their faces closer. Gwen felt hot behind the ears. She blinked rapidly and turned her head away from the window. What do I care what other girls do with my cousin? She reached off to the side and picked up Characasta's spell book, turning to one of the pages she had bookmarked, the one she was referencing for this ritual. Gotta focus. Holding up the book, Gwen quickly double-checked to make sure she had everything set up correctly. The designs in the circle, the placement of the candles and the other reagents, the phase of the moon. Everything appeared to be in order. Gwen placed the book on the ground. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Slowly, she lifted her arms from her sides and began to recite the incantation she had memorized. After a few minutes, she opened her eyes, which now glowed bright blue. A similar blue magic aura surrounded her hands. She brought her hands together in front of her. From beneath her, a pillar of blue light extended upwards. The pillar of light moved forward until the stone in the circle was in the center of it. Gwen continued the incantation, her voice reverberating with power. The stone began to rise into the air, hovering a few feet off the ground. It began to spin and vibrate, getting faster as Gwen continued to speak. As Gwen spoke the final words of the spell, the blue magic lights were all extinguished in an instant. The candles around the circle blew out, and the stone dropped back down onto the floor. Gwen sat there for a second. She wasn't sure whether or not the stone was supposed to keep hovering. Did it work? Tentatively, Gwen reached forward and grasped the stone, lifting it up. For a moment, nothing happened. But then the pattern of lines etched into the stone glowed blue. She gasped and smiled. Success! Clutching the stone tightly in her hand, she looked around the room for something to test it on. Deciding on a desk lamp, Gwen stared at it and held out her empty hand, willing the lamp to lift into the air. She felt a power flowing through her. The lamp began to shake. Slowly, it rose off of the desk a few inches into the air. Gwen smiled at her accomplishment, but suddenly she felt like she was holding a heavy weight in her outstretched hand. She let go of her focus, and the lamp fell back down. Yes! Gwen cheered triumphantly, jumping to her feet. She had recreated the charm of telekinesis. It was still fairly weak, and she still had a few more rituals to perform before it would be at full strength, but this was a big step in the right direction. Ordinarily, whenever she lifted something with magic, Gwen would have to envelop the object in a magic aura or create a magic platform with which to lift it. Doing something like that, as with any kind of magic, was rather taxing and would quickly tire her out if she did it too much. But this was different. The charm seemed to be supplying all the magic she needed, and telekinetically lifting that lamp felt pretty much the same as physically lifting it, just from farther away. Gwen remembered the future version of herself she'd met almost 3 years ago. Future her could fly, presumably using the charm. Gwen got excited at the prospect of trying that. Clutching the charm tightly again, Gwen willed herself to float. She didn't move. Closing her eyes, she tensed her whole body, concentrating as much as she could on the task at hand. Suddenly, she lifted into the air. It was painful, like doing a chin-up with her whole body. Then she tilted backwards accidentally. Gwen untensed her body and fell to the floor, landing on her back. Her whole body ached, but she laughed. Turning her head to the side, she had a view under her bed. She saw the box of memorabilia she'd collected from her first summer trip. After her hard work had paid off with the successful first steps of recreating the charm in her hand, she decided there was something in that box she wanted to see right now. Reaching under her bed, she pulled out the box and dug through it until she found a small black tape recorder. She held it up and pressed play. "Gwen, you did a good job." The voice of Ben emanated from the low-quality speaker. Gwen smiled as she remembered back to the day this was recorded. It was from her first adventure as Lucky Girl, her first introduction to magic. She'd come a long way since then. She rewound the tape and pressed play again. "Gwen, you did a good job." Gwen's smile faltered a little as her expression turned forlorn. She looked back out her window. "I wish he was here for this." Gwen's cheeks flushed as she thought that. Part of her was really mad at him for missing this. To her, it felt like an important event. She may not have ambitions of becoming a great sorceress like her future self, but her success felt like some sort of important scientific breakthrough, and she was proud of it. However, another part of her was mad at herself for letting him miss this. She could have told him about it earlier rather than springing it on him last night, and she could have told him that she really wanted him to be here instead of saying she just needed an acolyte. What happened to honesty? She hit play on the tape recorder one last time. Gwen, you did a good job. She sighed. Yeah, I guess I did. Monday afternoon, Ben was in high spirits. In school that morning, Julie had been just as happy to see him as she'd been the night before, which made him consider the date a terrific success. Two of her friends had approached him as well, giggling excitedly as they told him they'd heard about their date from Julie. Immediately after the date, Ben had been worried he'd messed it up by being awkward or boring the whole time, but apparently it had gone well enough for her to tell her friends about it without any obvious complaints. As he went to meet up with Gwen, he was hoping she would ask him about it so he could say it had gone great. He also thought he might be able to tell her all about it and get a girl's perspective on whether or not he'd made any mistakes. Gwen definitely wouldn't give up a chance to point out my mistakes, that's for sure. When he spotted her, she looked a little anxious about something, so he wanted to lighten the mood. Sup, dweeb, he greeted her with a smirk. Gwen snapped out of whatever daze she was in and switched to a blank expression. Hey, she said simply in return. Guess what I did last night, Ben said, getting ready to brag. Why would I guess? Gwen asked. You told me on Saturday what you had planned for Sunday. Ben detected mild annoyance coming from her. Oh. Yeah. Ben remembered that. Well, guess how it went. I don't want to, but I have a feeling you're gonna tell me anyway. I'm gonna tell you anyway. Ben said, not waiting for a pause after Gwen finished her sentence. It went. Gwen clutched her necklace through her shirt with one hand. With the other, she swiped upwards like she was smacking the air. Ben smacked himself in the face mid-sentence, the force of Gwen's telekinesis moving his hand against his will. Ow! Ben cried in pain, interrupting himself. It felt like someone had shoved his hand upwards, but Gwen was clearly too far away to have touched him when she made that gesture. What the hell was that? Gwen shrugged and gave Ben a smirk. Just trying it out, she said. Realization dawned on him. Oh, so you got the charm working? Ben asked. Yep. Gwen confirmed. She reached into her shirt. Having his gaze drawn to her chest like that made Ben uncomfortable, so he quickly looked away, hoping Gwen wouldn't notice. She pulled out the charm and dangled it in front of her. It still needs some work, but in theory, this shows it's possible to recreate the charms in their entirety, she explained. Cool. Ben said. Good job, Gwen. Gwen's eyes went wide for a second, then she smiled shyly. Well, thanks. She put the necklace back under her shirt, which made Ben turn his head again. So, what do you wanna do? Gwen asked. After that little interruption, Ben had completely forgotten he was about to tell Gwen about his date from the night before. I'm up for whatever. Wanna hang out a bit and then go to Burger Shack? Gwen smiled. Sure. She agreed to his suggestion. Ben wasn't sure why, but she seemed like she was in a much better mood all of a sudden. So, is Basil like a place? Or like a person? Ben asked, helping himself to some more of his chili fries. It's hard to tell, Gwen said. The references I find to the name sometimes say it's a dimension, but sometimes it sounds like it's referring to a sorcerer. Ben shrugged. Whoever created them probably just thought the name sounded cool. No one would care about the charms of Steve or whatever. Gwen laughed at that. There could actually be some truth to that. A lot of magic is based on the idea that words have power. That's why some spells have specific incantations. Ben took another chili fry and tossed it upwards, tilting his head back to catch it in his mouth. Gwen's arm shot forward and snatched it out of the air. Hey! Ben complained. Gwen ate the fry, giving Ben a cocky grin. You don't even like those, Ben said. Gwen shrugged. Beating you makes them taste better. Ben grabbed his box of fries and moved it closer to his end of the table. So, what's the next step with making that charm? Ben asked. Gwen took her necklace out again. Another ritual, but this one needs some special reagents, Gwen explained. Some of it I can probably order off the internet. But some of it I might need XLR8 to get for me. XLR8? Ben was confused. Why do you need that one? If I could get it myself, I would, Gwen said. But I can't exactly hop on a plane to South America and be back before my parents notice I'm gone. And what happened to don't use your powers except in emergencies, huh? Ben pointed out. Gwen hadn't thought of that. I guess that's kind of hypocritical of me. Well, I just thought. Ben laughed. Relax, I'll get you whatever you need. Although even XLR8 might take a while getting that far. Gwen was relieved. Great. I'm sure we can figure something out. Besides, I won't need everything for a while anyway. After they finished eating, Ben walked Gwen home. Gwen walked up her front steps. Hey, you wanna go to the mall tomorrow? Gwen asked before opening the door. Ben put on an apologetic look. I can't, he said. I'm hanging out with Julie after school tomorrow. Oh, Gwen said. Damn it. Hey, it's no big deal, Ben said. It's just one day. We can go the day after, okay? Yeah, Gwen said. Sure, let's do that. Cool. Well, see ya, dweeb, Ben said, turning to leave. Bye. Gwen didn't say anything else. She went inside and shut the door behind her. It's just one day. She was very irritated to hear that phrase coming from him a second time. She hoped she wouldn't have to hear it again. But at the same time, that thought made her feel selfish. Why can't I just be happy for him? And that's the ending of this part, everyone. Hope you like the video. Like, share and subscribe the channel, and also tell me your recommendation in the comment section down below. Thanks for watching.